صلوا على محمد وآل محمد الله. Inshallah, I'll start off with a short recitation of Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كتب عليكم إذا حضر أحدكم الموت إن ترك خيرا الوصية للوالدين والأقربين بالمعروف حقا على المتقين فمن بدله بعدما سمعه فإنما إثمه على الذين يبدلونه إن الله سميع عليم. فمن خاف من مؤس جنفا أو إثما فأصلح بينهم فلا إثم عليه إن الله غفور رحيم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. The verses that I recited are from Surah Baqarah, chapter 2, ayat number 180, 181, and 182. Translation goes as follows. If any one of you facing death can leave a legacy, he should bequeath it to his parents and relatives according to the law. This is the duty of the pious. Whoever intentionally changes the will of a deceased person, he has committed a sin. God is all hearing and all knowing. One who is afraid of the testosterone deviations and sin and settles the matter among the parties involved, he has not committed a sin. God is all forgiving and all merciful. Sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So today, on behalf of Masjid-e-Ali and also the American Muslim Bar Association, we present to you this program, End of Life Planning and Will Drafting, the Islamic Perspective. Hopefully, the purpose of this is just so everyone can walk away a little bit more informed. They can go back and do their research and try to make sure that they have their end of life, their will, their directives, and their documents, everything sorted out. So even if you walk away a little bit more informed, alhamdulillah, our purpose is done. If you have any questions, we're going to be doing a short question and answer session right after each agenda item, and then also at the end for any of the panelists. I'm going to do a short introduction, and then we'll jump into our program. So just a few disclaimers. I just wanted to note that the information presented in this session, it's for informational purposes only, of course. It doesn't constitute actual legal advice. While every effort has been made to ensure the accuracy of the content, laws, regulations, everything that's going to be presented today, everything is, of course, subject to change. Please consult a qualified professional. We're going to have a few on our panel today for advice regarding your specific legal or medical situation. I'd like to first introduce from our panel, we've got Sayyid Ali Tawfiq. Born and raised in Maryland, Sayyid Ali Tawfiq is a Hausa-trained scholar and attorney. He pursued Islamic seminary studies in Qom, Iran for 6 years. He later returned to the United States to attend law school at George Washington Law School in Washington, D.C. He currently serves the Ummah as both an Islamic scholar and an attorney via his private practice, Tawfiq Law, and the Islamic Law Institute. He is also one of the co-founders of the American Muslim Bar Association, and he is licensed to practice law in New Jersey, Maryland, DC, Texas, and California. We then have on our panel Sister Zainab Hamdan. She has experience in estate planning, surrogates court, working with businesses and nonprofits. She is a proud graduate of CUNY School of Law, where she was awarded the Sorensen Center for Peace and Justice Fellowship. She is also a graduate of Smith College. She currently serves as the mentorship chair for the American Muslim Bar Association and co-executive chair of the Human Rights First Emerging Leaders Advisory Board. She speaks Arabic, she loves to learn languages, and Zainab loves to travel and has worked internationally with different organizations. She is licensed to practice law in New York. I would also like to introduce Dr. Tehseen. Dr. Mohammed Tehseen is a critical care physician at Capital Health Medical Center in Pennington, New Jersey, where he is in charge of taking care of complex and critically sick patients in a medical ICU. He is a teaching faculty for internal medicine and transitional year residency programs with research interests in healthcare cost, health equity, and humane ICU care. He is also actively involved in various community outreach initiatives in the city of Trenton and Pennington, New Jersey. Dr. Tehseen has been awarded New Jersey Top Doctors in 2023 and 2024, along with the Best Teaching Faculty by Internal Medicine and Emergency Medicine Residents in 2023 and 2024, mashallah. I would also like to introduce Dr. Mustafa Jaffrey. Dr. Mustafa Jaffrey is a pulmonologist, a lung specialist, and an intensivist, a critical care specialist, with Hackensack Meridian Health in New Jersey. He is faculty of the Hackensack Meridian School of Medicine, teaching medical students and residents in the classroom as well as in the hospital. He has a special interest in post-intensive care syndrome, working with patients in the ICU, as well as helping them with life after the ICU. And of course, last but not least, someone who we are all familiar with, Maulana Rizwan is, a New Jersey native. He attended the Islamic Seminary of Qom in 2000 and studied under some of the best and renowned theologians of the Hawza. Following his studies in Qom, he felt the need to improve his fluency in Arabic in pursuit of this goal. He traveled to Damascus, enrolled in advanced Arabic courses at Damascus University's Arabic Language Institute, and completely immersed himself in an Arabic-speaking environment. During his stay in Syria, he also periodically traveled to the United States and lectured at various Islamic centers, and he is our resident scholar here at Masjid-e-Ali. I'm Noreen Jaffrey, and I'm also a member of this community. I am also an attorney. I am not an attorney very well versed in wills. I'm not a trust and estates lawyer, but I'm a labor and employment attorney. And I work with the state of New Jersey for an agency called the Public Employment Relations Commission. And I also serve as the education chair of the American Muslim Bar Association. So in our efforts to educate the public, we're putting this program together, and hopefully you all benefit from it. So I'm going to now begin with our first item on the agenda, and I'm going to turn it over to Sister Zainab, who will be discussing consequences of dying without a will. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you, Noreen, for the introduction and for helping us put this together. And thank you to Masjid-e-Ali for having us and Amba for working on this panel. I am also the mentorship chair of the American Muslim Bar Association, so if you have any young people who want to become lawyers, please send them to me. So my topic today is talking about the consequences of dying without a will. Just a little extra background about why I'm interested in discussing this topic with everyone. I used to work as an assistant law clerk in Kings County in Brooklyn, to surrogate court judge. And a lot of my work dealt with people, what happens when someone dies without a will, and what happens when someone dies without a will, what happens to their property, who has to handle the administration of their property. And it becomes a very long and time-consuming process. So the goal today is to get you to understand how time-consuming and long that process is, and hopefully convince you to make a will. And I know there are other reasons why we make wills in Islam, and we'll discuss that later, but I'm just gonna speak from the legal practical standpoint. So topics of discussions: what happens if you die without a will or estate plan? What is the court process? Basics of a will, and then advanced directives. As I said, the goal of our presentation is to walk away with an understanding of the purpose of estate planning. Just some definitions for the legal words that I'll be using throughout, and then if I use a word that somebody doesn't understand, please feel free to let me know. An estate plan can be a will, a revocable trust, an irrevocable trust. There's a lot of discussion about trusts now in the public sphere. A last will and testament, which is a document you will write your objectives and your directions for how you want your property to be distributed after your death, who you want to be your executor, how you want your debts to be handled. Intestate is basically dying without a will. We call the laws for that intestacy laws. So I might say that, and I just want you to understand what it means. Executor is the fiduciary you appoint in your will to carry out your directions in your will. They don't get, it's not, and there's common misunderstanding that they're the ones who inherit everything. That's not what happens. They are the person who you entrust to carry out your wishes. So it should be someone who's responsible, trustworthy amongst your relatives and family, to avoid problems down the line. Okay, so what happens if I die without an estate plan? Dying without an estate plan means that somebody from your family, typically your closest living relative, will have to file a petition in surrogate's court to be appointed as administrator of the estate. So as Noreen mentioned, I'm not licensed in New Jersey, but it is a similar process in New Jersey and New York. It's a typical process. It's a similar process in New Jersey and New York. Someone will have to file a petition with the court. They'll have to be appointed. They'll have to get consent from all the family members involved. So if, like, let's say the father in the family dies, the wife is left, and then 3 children, it can be the wife or the 3 children who are appointed as administrator, and their job is to gather all the assets, figure out what they are, and then administer them according to the law. So intestacy inheritance laws in New Jersey. This is what happens if you don't write a will. The state has one written out for you. So they have laws and how your property should be administered. So if you die, you leave your spouse, only your marital children, the surviving spouse inherits everything. If you die and are married with children from a previous marriage or children outside of your marriage, then your spouse is entitled to the first 25% of the intestate property. That's a minimum of $50,000 and a maximum of $200,000 and half of the remaining balance. The remaining balance is split between the children. And then if there's a surviving spouse and no children, but the parents of the deceased are still alive, the above formula applies. So there are Quranic ayahs directing and more directing in how your inheritance should be distributed. This does not match that. This is the state of the law of New Jersey. And then inheritance laws in New York. So if you die without a will in New York, if there is a surviving spouse, $50,000 off everything, you gather everything together and $50,000 off of that, and then 1/2 of the rest of the estate. And then the rest will be distributed to the issue, which is the children, equally by representation. If there is no surviving spouse, then to the issue by representation and onwards. Okay, so basic drafts of a will. Your last will and testament is a document that expresses your wishes for how you want your property to be distributed upon your death. And there were a few questions I saw that came in yesterday about like how to validate a will. So when a will is written, the testator needs to sign it, and there needs to be signatures of 2 witnesses who are competent and above 18. So that's how you have your will validated when you want to file it in the probate court. In a will, you would name your executor, as we discussed, and you can name a successor executor in case that person, the first executor, is not able to serve for whatever reason. If you have minor children, you can name a guardian for your minor children if something happens to you or your spouse and you unfortunately pass away and there's no one to take care of your kids. And then you can handle your inheritance however you choose. Trying to make sure. So, and also in a will, you would direct how you pay off your debts, whatever debts you have, your funeral bill. You would revoke all other wills. And then, let's see if we have anything else. So Sayyid Ali is going to discuss what happens in the time of incapacity.
Okay. So as a continuation of the conversation of estate planning, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, estate planning is unfortunately sometimes limited to what happens after someone dies. But that's not a complete estate plan. That's just one part of your life. It's the passing away and how things are distributed. But a major part of estate planning is that little phase in between death and, well, current life, which is incapacity. And many people who don't plan for it, let's just say the family members have to go through some unnecessary hardship, unfortunately. And so we'll discuss some ways that we can kind of give our family security, inshallah. So incapacity planning is part of an estate plan. And there are two different types of plans. One is related to financial decisions, one is related to medical decisions. So you have what's called a power of attorney. A power of attorney is someone has now authority to sign documents on your behalf for financial decisions. So you designate an agent. That agent can now go to the bank, go to, well, even the title companies and kind of sign deeds on your behalf. And some people, you know, if it's maybe someone you trust, you give them agency right now. But most durable power of attorneys are those that the moment you're incapacitated, and one of our doctors over here say that you are incapacitated, then they can go and sign on your behalf. So the verification of incapacity, power of attorney, sign. Simple as that. And I'm going to tell you like one scenario where I actually had to deal with this for a client that could have ended differently if they had done this. There was a husband and wife with no children, and this husband had dementia, and he was the sole breadwinner. He had made enough for him and his wife and a decent retirement to be able to take care of his family, even as a senior. He has dementia. He no longer has access to his retirement account. Even though that retirement account, he had designated his wife as a beneficiary. So his wife would have been the full owner of everything if he had passed away, but he didn't. What they wanted from him was a power of attorney, and he didn't have it, and he couldn't sign it anymore. That's one simple scenario where that family could have had access to the money. Instead, she now had to work, had to put him into elderly care, couldn't pay for any of these things, started falling behind on the mortgage. So power of attorney, very important. And these documents in the state of New Jersey are actually made public. And so those of us who are participating will actually receive a link to these documents so that you can actually fill them out at home. And these are templates. I didn't mess with them. Provided by the state of New Jersey. And they're fairly straightforward. You write your name, you choose your agent, you decide what type of powers you're giving to this agent, and then you have a successor agent, and you have your signatures and your notary signatures. Simple as that, 6-page document, better than any bank form you've ever signed. Then you have a medical power of attorney, a healthcare proxy, healthcare directive. Every state calls it something different. This is a conversation that will, inshallah, when our medical professionals come up and kind of give you all the different variations and options here, this goes hand in hand with that. So there's a legal component, which is you designating an agent to make those decisions for you. That's called a healthcare proxy. So this simple 2-page form, your name, agent, witnesses, any limitations, will choose one person to make that decision for you. They consult with our doctors here, and they decide what medical treatment is necessary. Then you have this thing called a living will or a healthcare directive. And that's basically you choosing for everyone. You've already made your decisions right now, whether you want to be intubated in a senior home facility, and et cetera. What type of care you want for yourself when you can't make those decisions. It's pre-planning, essentially. And all those conversations will, inshallah, come in a few minutes. But these legal documents are setting the tone for that, inshallah. And so these forms will be available to anyone who have participated. And then one scenario that I actually dealt with in relation to this, there was a parent of many children, over 5, and there was no healthcare proxy in place. And this elderly mother had let's say, a lot of medical complications over the years, and it got to a point where she needed extensive care. Now, every single one of these children decided that they knew what was best for the parent. So what happens when you have 5 decision makers in a room? Or 2 decision makers in the morning, 2 decision makers in the afternoon? The medical treatment was inconsistent. People were deciding things without having a whole picture. And the doctors over here are going to struggle because they don't actually have a clean chain of command as to who's to make that decision. This makes it very clear for the medical professionals, and it's best for you in terms of having a hierarchy of who makes those decisions for you, inshallah. So we're going to move on to a Q&A. If there are any general questions about this subject, so will, medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney. We're both available for a couple minutes of questions, inshallah. Yes. Alaikum assalam. So the question that was asked was, let's say you fill out these forms, do you sign them in front of a notary? How do you ensure that they are valid legal documents?
So for a will, the signature would be notarized, and you would just sign it in front of 2 people. There are like gray areas where the witnesses can sign within a specific time. They don't have to sign it in front of anyone immediately, but I wouldn't get into that. You would sign it in front of 2 witnesses, and then signatures would be notarized. So it's best to have an attorney do it and have like a signing ceremony. And then the ways you can record a will, you can have it leave it in a fireproof safe. That's the gold standard, or file it within the courts. I think New Jersey allows you to file wills within the courts. In New York, they do.
So we have the minimum, and then we have good practice.
Yes.
The minimum is, well, there's a variations. Actually, the first thing we learned in law school is that the first will that was kind of put in case law is someone took one of these napkins, wrote everything to my wife, signed. And technically, that is a valid holographic will in many states, right? And you don't actually submit these wills anywhere. But to make it easy for everyone here, the basic standard is will signed 2 witnesses. Notaries are mustahab, not mandatory. In many states, I'm not going to speak on behalf of New York or some of the states I'm not licensed in, but 2 witnesses are sufficient. And the fireproof safe is keeping the will in a safe place so that in case something happens to your house or whatever, there's someone who has access to that will. The will doesn't need to be submitted anywhere until you have passed. The will just needs to be kept in a safe place and somewhere accessible so that your executor takes it to court when need be. And so some people make copies, and those copies are not valid unless you prove that the original was gone. But yeah, so the basics are sign, witnesses, keep a safe place. Best practice, make copies, fireproof safe. Submit it if you actually feel like someone's going to distort it. That's for the will. Power of attorney and healthcare directive have different things. So the healthcare proxy here, if you look, there are 2 witnesses and a signature. That's all you need. And so if you were to have these forms, you have plenty of witnesses, mashallah. But the power of attorney, generally speaking, they won't accept it unless it's notarized. So power of attorney, notarized, healthcare, witnessed. Yes?
The healthcare proxy, is it, it's valid in all the states or in a particular state where you are?
I mean, people sign the forms of their own residency, right? So if you're a New Jersey resident, you would sign a New Jersey form.
Yeah, but you could go on a holiday, you know.
Yeah, you could take those forms with you, and those are valid forms, yeah.
It's valid, so you don't have to.
Yeah, in terms of practice for the power of attorney, like, do you submit the power of attorney anywhere? Do you submit the healthcare? You don't have to, you can. It helps the bank, for example, if it's a financial power of attorney, or the hospital know, I've already chosen my agent, here's who you contact in case something goes wrong. A lot of times, if you've dealt with ambulances for an emergency, after they get all the vitals, the next question they ask is, has this form been signed? And they ask for it just to know who they're supposed to talk to.
Is there an expiry on any of those documents?
There's no official expiry unless you list one. However, for the financial documents, it's very much whether the bank has reason to believe that these are no longer reliable. And it's very arbitrary. So it could be like after 2 years, after 5 years, whatever they think. For the medical one, technically, there's no legal expiration date, unless you specifically write one. And by the way, Sister Noreen, whenever you need to move on to the next section, you'll let me know. Yes?
I remember last time when you had the session, you said notarize is not necessary.
Correct. So the will, yes, no notary. Only the financial power of attorney requires a notary for the banks to be able to rely on it. The medical, no, does not. And neither does the will officially need a notary. It's recommended.
I have a last question in this regard. If you choose someone as trust or successor to executor
Yeah.
your will, is it necessary for the other person to also accept that, or how that part works?
So the question that was asked was, do you need to ask permission from the executor that you put in the will and the successors? Would you like to answer that, Sister Zena?
Do they need to sign the document that they have accepted to be your successor?
No, they don't need to. They don't need to accept anything. You should tell them you nominated them as executor, and you should, like, I think it's good practice to tell everyone in your family who the executor is, what the property is, like how you're dividing it, because there are moments of surprise, or like people start to argue. I think when people die, just what I've seen in the courts is people die and like they start taking their grief out on each other. So it'll just be like, you don't deserve to be executor because this and another thing. And I know, like, in our families, we're very family-oriented cultures, but like you want to avoid that, and one of the best ways to avoid that is to keep your family in the loop on what you're doing and what you're thinking. And also, like, being an executor is very time-consuming. Like, they'll have to deal with the court. So when you die, you file the will with the court, and at least in New York, you file a probate petition and the will and all this other documentation, and it has to be approved by a judge. So it's a very time-consuming process. And you need someone who wants to handle that and like can handle it. So like, it's good to have conversations with who you're thinking of appointing as executor. I think, at least. That's what I recommend.
Yeah, so technically, you don't have to tell Molana that you've listed him as your executor. You can. Not a bad idea. But that's technicality, right? That also means that he technically doesn't have to accept. But best practice is keep everyone informed to avoid family conflict. Yes?
Question about a will.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at the forms. Is that like a generic form, or can you customize it yourself? And what are the pros and cons
Yeah,
of drafting your own will?
correct. So, do you want to answer that, or should I?
Do you mean the living will or like the healthcare box?
No.
Like a
Living
will.
will. Yeah,
Living
will, yes.
There are templates.
But you can definitely customize it to however you want. There are like basic requirements, right? You have to have it signed correctly. It has to be executed correctly. But there are basic provisions in all of them. Like, you name who your family is, who your family members are, who you nominate as executor, how you want your debts to be taken care of. But is there anything else you can think of that needs to be in there?
Yeah, so the requirements are fairly simple. As she mentioned, it's where's the property to go, who's going to be the one to handle it, sign, witness, right? But then there are all these other clauses in there that come and facilitate different parts of this process, right? The court process. So like the no bond provision, people don't think about. They don't know that they have to put a bond down in order to, execute the will, for example. All these other things. So there are templates out there that take care of that. Another thing that I'm not going to tell you what to do, what not to do. I'm just going to say a certain consideration to have is people will write a will thinking that their assets will be transferred a certain way, not knowing that the will only handles assets that are left in your name when you pass, right? So you need to consult with an attorney to see whether or not a simple will or template will do what you're intending for it to do, right? So as a very simple example, you'll write in your will, here are all the Islamic provisions, or let's say everything to my kids. Sorry, everything to my wife. Let's just say everything to my wife in the will. But then all your assets are in this one joint account with you and your kids. The moment you pass, everything's going to your kids. Your will does nothing. So it's not about the will being valid or not. The will is valid, but it doesn't correspond with your intentions because there are some other laws that you need to be aware of.
Can I add to it?
Sure.
So hypothetically speaking, I pass away and I leave everything to my wife. Now, does she have to have a separate will to say, okay, I'm going to distribute it like this? Is that, how do you protect yourself, or how, I mean, does she come up with another will?
Well, yeah, wills are, each person has their own will. I remember, I think in theory, or maybe there's some states that accept like joint wills, but we generally don't have that. Everyone has their own independent will. So, like usually I think I understand what you're asking. You're saying, I'm gonna have everything to my wife, and my wife may have the same thing, everything back to me, but then what happens if like both of us go, or like one after the other? Well, then you have contingencies, you have backups. Everything to my wife, if not my wife, then X person and Y person. Is that the question you were asking?
Pretty much, but do you have these available? You said you're going to provide a link.
Yeah, so there are template wills out there, and there's a New Jersey form that I kind of found, one for married.
Oh,
New York,
I
perfect.
can
There we
talk
go.
to you more about that.
That's her
like,
department.
Yeah, so there are clauses in there that you can put that if I die first, everything to her, and then if she dies first, everything to me, and then you would have contingencies. Yeah, so when you meet with an attorney, the point is to...
How do I skip an attorney?
How do you skip an attorney? I'll help you out later. We'll talk about it later.
Question there, yes?
If you outlive the witnesses, then do you have to do it?
Can you say that one more time? Sorry?
If you outlive the witnesses,
Yeah.
then what do? Do you have to go again, square one, or what?
Do you want to answer that? So technically, the witnesses signing, that is enough for the validity of the will. The will is valid. It doesn't activate until you're passing. Okay. Now, when the will gets taken to court, the judge will come in, evaluate, see if there's any dispute. Is there anyone trying to object to the validity of this will, in which case they'll try to maybe reach out to the witnesses or do something of that sort. It doesn't contest the validity of the will. So the will stays valid even if your witnesses are no longer around. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, somebody could challenge you that when you made this decision,
Yeah,
you suspect you are not in good state of mind,
sure.
and there is no witness there. There's only one witness now. The other
Yeah.
one has expired.
Sure.
So does that cause complications?
It can cause so like everything legal in this country, it's not about you will protect yourself, but that doesn't mean people won't fight. They will dispute regardless. Whether or not their argument has standing is something that the judge will decide. And if at the time of signing these two people said, "He looks okay to me," that will have a lot of merit, a lot more merit than just someone disputing it without any evidence of such. So they would need to prove, for whatever reason, that X person was not in the right state of mind. And the two witness signatures, even the person who has passed away, still has some level of some bearing.
But don't you have two witnesses, so how can someone say that he was not insensitive or he or she?
I mean, yeah, so if one person passes, you still have that second person. But the idea of having two witnesses, I mean...
Not the second person, two witnesses.
Correct.
You are doing your will, you have two witnesses.
Yes.
To sign. So how can somebody else
Yeah.
say that this person was out of senses or something was wrong with his mind?
Yeah.
So those witnesses are there to protect the dead person's will.
Correct. So that's why that legal requirement is there, but like I'll give you a scenario which may cause something. Let's say that I have 3 friends, 3 very close buddies. I ask buddy number 1 and buddy number 2 to sign my will, and everything's going to buddy number 3. Okay, and then buddy number 3 has this plan to give everything between the 3 of them. Is it legal and valid? Yeah. Does it cause a little bit of suspicion? Maybe so. I would tell buddy number 3 to wait a few years before distributing, but yes. We still have good time? Are you sure? Okay. You mean have multiple people with the same authority, or one person takes care of my house, one person takes care of my car? Yes, yes, yes. Of course. You can list as many successors and alternates and even joint power of attorneys. The forms may not have the space for it, which is why an attorney will be able to modify some of this. But yeah, you can.
And the executor is just going to execute the will?
Yes.
Or they can make other decisions as well if something is missing in the will?
They will only execute what the will says.
And if there's no will, then they go to the default state.
If there is no will, the court appoints an executor based on what's best and whatever the laws say and the hierarchy.
So if I have the power of attorney, like I have someone assigned, but I don't have a will, or no one can find the will,
Yes.
then there's no, like,
Yeah. Your power of attorney is, so okay, very common misconception, or let me just say the truth. Your power of attorney dies with you. So I've heard this so many times. You don't need to worry about anything. I made a power of attorney. You can do anything you need on my behalf. Once you pass, that power of attorney is gone. Has no validity. Yes. Yes.
So can your witnesses for your will, can they benefit from your will? Is that contradictory?
Yeah, it's contradictory. So if Maulana is signing your will as a witness, he'll know you're not leaving anything to him. Yeah. That's the metric I use. Yes. I see. Wills and trusts. That is a lengthy conversation.
Maybe part 2.
Like a part 2 session, inshallah. Okay. Part 2 session, I will just say a one-sentence summary. Your will is a statement of wishes on paper. Your executor takes it to court. That process goes. A trust is a chest where you put everything inside it, and that outlives you. And you have instructions for how that operates. Do you have backups? And if you don't have backups, then you petition the court. Yes.
The first 2 slides, presentation by Zainab, is that for somebody who died without a will? That shows the percentages and
Yes, yes. So that's if someone dies without a will. I'm just trying to show you. Yeah, I was just the point was for you to understand how the state handles your assets after you die. So
they will assign an executor, and then he will take care about all of this details.
yes, so it's an administrator in New Jersey, right? The word.
Yeah, the words are different state by state.
State by state.
Administrator, personal representative,
Personal
executor.
representative. So they're a fiduciary, which means they're responsible for your distributing your assets according to the law. And so in New Jersey, this is how it's distributed. In New York, this is how it's distributed. So I just wanted to see, like, even if you don't make an estate plan, or like, the state has one for you. So.
How do they know about the properties outside the states? Like, for example, if somebody died and he doesn't have a wall and he has a house, for example,
Okay.
in Canada or in Mexico or something.
So I want to dispel a little misconception. It's not like when someone passes away, the court comes knocking on your door saying, okay, time to distribute your property. It's the responsibility of the family to do that. If the family doesn't do it, it just stays the way it is. So you'll have people with, property in the name of people who passed away in 1985. True story.
I just want to make a quick comment.
On debtors, if you have any creditors, they also are entitled to know about this. So like if you wait too long to file, you have to file this whole like we've done this in New York. You have to file an affidavit of delay for not filing an administration petition. So your the creditors of the deceased, can know that this person died and like have their rights to the person's estate. So just so you know.
So the way I like to kind of like address it is when someone passes away, there's like there's a lot of steps.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the will. Before the will even comes about, you have to notify everyone about the death. So like in some states, you have to like publish in a newspaper, hear ye, this person has passed away. Everyone come forward with your whatever claims, speak now, forever hold your peace type thing. And so it goes through all this, and then the will becomes public information. So your will is private until you pass. When it goes to court, it's public.
When you talk about the key issues with regards to end of life, like in the hospital, do you pull the plug, do you not, which stages, like is that part of the background?
Yes, that is Maulana's department, inshallah, towards the end of the session. Strategically plan at the end so you stay through the full workshop. So inshallah, we're going to move on to the next section, which is related to what to expect in the event of incapacity and medical planning and all these different acronyms that doctors know and we have no idea what they are, inshallah.
Yes, so moving on to the next segment, end-of-life issues with Dr. Mohammed Tahsin and Dr. Mustafa Jafri. Thank you.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
While Maulana is uploading the slides, I'll say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Sharh li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani wa yafqahu qawli. I'll start with saying the gratitude on my behalf, on Dr. Mustafa Jafri's behalf, to the conveners of the workshop, Dr. Iqbal Jafri, Maulana Rizwan Rizvi, and to Masjid-e-Ali community in large. Thanks a lot for coming to this very valuable event and giving us the opportunity to learn from each other.
You can all hear you, but the people.
Perfect, yes, great.
Wonderful. Wonderful. As Dr. Tahsin mentioned, just want to echo the sentiments. Thank you. As we were introduced, Dr. Tahsin and I were doctors who specialize with very sick people. So we work in the ICU, and we're going to talk about what those differences are. Hospital, sometimes we get, oh, you're in the ICU. Does that mean you're in the ER? Does that mean you're in the hospital? So we'll talk about what the lay of the land is and what that looks like, because I know in the moment, a hospital seems like a very scary and complicated place, but we're going to make things a lot easier for you to understand as to what to expect in a hospital. And when we're dealing with a life and death situation, what is our role and how can we all be prepared for, God forbid, this unfortunate reality. So these are some of our objectives. We're going to talk about what the ER versus hospital versus ICU is. We're going to talk about a CPR and a ventilator, otherwise known as a breathing machine. And we're going to get into the ICU experience as well, meaning, God forbid, if you're admitted to the ICU or any of your loved ones are admitted to the ICU, what do you expect to happen in the ICU? We're also going to talk about what is the terms DNR and DNI, which I'm sure we've heard of, and what does that entail. We'll talk about what palliative care means, and we'll clarify that definition. And then finally, we're going to explain some end-of-life measures, including comfort measures, withdrawal of care, no escalation of care, which I'm sure, inshallah, we'll expound with talks with our Maulana. So when it comes to the hospital versus ER versus ICU, essentially what are we looking at? If you're sick, we say you go to the hospital. Usually the first stop in the hospital is the emergency room. So the emergency room is just a big area. You go in, you're seen by an emergency room physician, nurses, they take a look at you, and they try to figure out what's going in that moment. What happens is, let's say you come in with some health issue, it gets better. If it gets better, the ER will send you home. They'll say, okay, you're doing better, very good. Or if it's not really a serious enough situation for you to stay in the hospital, the ER will say you can go home and you can follow with your doctor, your primary doctor or other doctors, and that's that. If you're sick enough in the emergency room, something is really wrong that you need to stay in the hospital, then you're going to be admitted to either the medical surgical unit, so this is just the regular hospital floor. So you're admitted to the hospital, they give you a bed, doctors see you every day, they do some workup on you, and then that's that. If you're very, very sick, meaning it's a life and death situation, then this is where Dr. Tahseen and I come in. That's called the ICU. It's the intensive care unit, which Dr. Tahseen will get into a little bit more.
Since you are very sick, you cannot be managed in a regular medical or surgical unit. And that's why we designed these specific places inside almost every tertiary care hospital all over the state, in fact, all over the world, where physicians like Dr. Mustafa and myself are board certified intensivists. We are provider of that care that needs a specialized care. Because we have certain instruments, we take care of the disease processes that other doctors cannot take care of it. You might need a surgery, you might need a procedure, you might need those medications which a regular doctor cannot provide on regular floors. That's why we had designed these special units, and they will be intensive care units. Many hospitals all over the states have divided these intensive care units, depends upon the need of the patient, whether they are medically sick patient, or they are surgically sick patient. Some of them will be cardiacally sick or neurologically sick. Whatever the issue might be, our ICUs can be differently designed for them. And that's why we, the physicians, the nurses who are housing that particular unit are specially trained to take care of the patients in those units.
So one of the terms that we hear about is CPR, which I'm sure is a term that's, that everybody has heard of. CPR stands for cardiopulmonary resuscitation. There are two big things that we care about in the ICU or in the medical world in general. Is your heart beating? And are you breathing? Those are the two big things that are going to help sustain your life. So if somebody's heart stops, we perform what we call CPR, which we're going to, you see a picture up there. Somebody is standing above the patient, and what you're doing is you're just pressing on their chest. So you imagine your heart is a pump, it beats like this. If your heart stops beating, it needs help, somebody needs to beat for it. So we go on top of the chest and we just press on the chest to make your heart beat. And we'll get into that a little bit further with Dr. Tahseen.
Since your heart stopped, somebody has to make sure it continues to beat. Otherwise, our brain are so sensitive that every second at that moment counts. If nobody is compressing on the heart, our brain is not getting any blood. Brain is the most important organ in our body. If it doesn't get the blood, it is a matter of seconds and mostly minutes when the brain is not going to be working. So that's why those patients whose heart is not working, we will do the CPR. It also involves sometimes delivery of shock. If the heart is in a condition where the electrical rhythm of the heart is very abnormal, we also deliver the shock. And that is part and parcel of somebody doing the chest compressions on you. Be careful about, this is a very traumatic event in somebody's life, a heart stopping. It's not the heart stopped. It is a life and death situation. If nobody helps them, this patient is not going to make. A few years back, Dr. Mustafa and I did a workshop on hands-only CPR. Some of our participants were there in that conference, in that workshops too, because if somebody's heart stopped outside the hospital, in the home, on the road, in the offices, the risk is same as the risk is in the hospital. The only difference inside the hospital is that fortunately you are in front of someone who knows how to save you. So they will be working on you within few seconds as compared to at home where things might get complicated if somebody does not know how to perform that CPR. That's why the time is very important. Whether inside the hospital or outside the hospital, seconds and minute counts. Survival depends upon for how long your heart was not working by itself and for how long somebody has to do artificial CPR on you. Usually the survival goes very quickly down after 10 minutes of CPR. You can imagine first 10 minutes when your heart stopped, if you did not come back to life, the chances of having a meaningful recovery is very difficult.
And actually, just with that point as well, the last point that Dr. Tahseen was mentioning, just to clarify, I think sometimes we're exposed to CPR through movies in Hollywood, where someone is doing CPR in a show, and the person wakes up and they just live their life. To be honest with you, that's not the reality. Does anyone know the survival for CPR, out of curiosity, off the top of your head? There's a lot of different numbers in the literature. But I'll tell you, depending on how good the CPR is and all of that, on average, probably about 10 to 15% of people survive CPR. This is contrary to, oh, well, I saw in the movie that they were doing CPR, everybody clear, shock, and somebody comes back to life, and next thing you know, they're at their child's wedding the next day. That doesn't unfortunately happen. We see it all too often that more likely than not, survival is very slim. And like what Dr. Tassin was saying, time is life. The sooner we can get you back to life for a meaningful recovery, the better.
Our objective is not to scare anyone over here. Our objective is to tell you what can happen when these situations arise. And we as believers, we know that life has to end, but this is how our life ends. If you are in the hospital or you're outside the hospital, physicians, your loved ones will try their level best to save you, but this happens. One part which happens when the heart stops, you can imagine our body is not getting blood. Our brain stops, which means we will be unconscious at that time, and somebody is trying their level best to wake us up. Our lungs also stop. Our lungs can stop without the heart, but usually when the heart stops, the lungs also stop. Let's say a situation where the heart is okay, and you're not unconscious, but we are extremely difficult to breathe. This is the time when we call that somebody's lungs have failed, and they need the help for the lung. But let's combine these situations. When the heart stops, the lungs gonna stop. Somebody is working on the heart, but somebody has to work on the lungs also. What we work on the lung is that the lung needs to go on a ventilator now, which means the lung cannot breathe by itself. It has to breathe artificially. The only way a lung can breathe artificially is that if we artificially put the oxygen inside the lung and take the carbon dioxide out of the lung. We do it in a procedure in which we will put a tube in the mouth, and that tube goes into the lung. When that tube goes into the lung, now we have an access to the lung. We will combine this tube with the machine, and the machine is called ventilator, or in general term, a breathing machine that will replace or support the functions of the lung. Of course, used for the patients who cannot breathe well on their own self. It is done with the endotracheal tube, which is the tube which is coming from inside the mouth from here, then getting connected, and all of these connections then eventually will go to the ventilator.
So, as Dr. Tassin mentioned, this is the breathing machine. The tube goes into your windpipe. So your windpipe is how you breathe. So the tube, it doesn't go into your swallowing pipe, it goes into your windpipe. Now you imagine, the way they've described this in the literature, they say what this feels like is it's as if somebody is taking two fingers and they're putting it down your throat. So that's obviously not very comfortable. So what we do for these patients is we put them on sleeping medicines. These are pain medicines, these are sedation medicines. These are medicines that are gonna, some people call it inducing a coma, some people call it putting you to sleep. The whole point is this is a very uncomfortable experience, so we put these patients on medicine so essentially they're sleeping through this process. Now, so let's say, God forbid, you have a family member in this situation, they may not be able to talk to you. So, for example, God forbid somebody's in the situation, you're trying to talk to them, they may be too sleepy because we are making them sleep, otherwise they'll be very uncomfortable on this machine. And the whole point is we want the patient to rest, so that way the ventilator, the breathing machine can take over and help their lungs do their job.
We'll take a segue to a little bit more support to the lung and this patient. You can imagine now this patient, his or her heart stopped, and fortunately they made it. Their heart started working once again. Now they are on a ventilator where their lungs are supported by the machine. The machine can do the job of the lung for a finite period of the time. The way we deliver the oxygen into the body through that tube which is connected with your mouth can stay there only for specific number of the days. It cannot stay in the body for long period of time. But unfortunately, sometimes our patients need that help, that support for a longer period of time. Some of you might have an experience of visiting family members inside the ICU. Some of us might have unfortunate experience of being a patient inside the ICU. If you remember from your previous experiences, you might have seen those patients who are connected or the loved ones that are connected with the ventilator. finite period of time can be 1 week or 2 weeks. Sometimes it can go beyond 2 weeks to third week. But you can imagine now somebody is living with these machines and support week after week, days after days. These machines are not friendly to the body. Like Dr. Jaffrey said, we need to sedate you and make sure you are comfortable while you are on these machines. One step that we do, once the machine requirement goes longer, the tube which is in the mouth, it gets replaced by another tube which goes in your neck. It is called a tracheostomy tube. It is relatively comfortable for the patient to have a tube here in the neck rather than going from the mouth. This tube then connected to the machine which is ventilator and gives the same amount of oxygen which is going inside your lung. So the machine remains same. The way we deliver this oxygen inside the body changes. Rather than in the mouth, we'll be delivering the machine oxygen through the tracheostomy inside your neck. So you might remember some of your patients, or God forbid if that moment comes, we are preparing you, your doctors might be talking about replacing the tube from the mouth into your neck.
Absolutely. So just to go off of what Dr. Tassin was saying, our goal with the breathing machine is to take it out as soon as possible, right? We don't want anybody to be on a breathing machine for a long time. But maybe the disease is so bad, or maybe you're so sick that we can't take it out right away. So the magic number, like what Dr. Tassin was talking about, is maybe about a few weeks. Some say a little bit earlier, some say later, but for all intents and purposes, about 2 weeks, if you feel like you're gonna be on the tube, that's when we start having these conversations that the tube needs to come out of the mouth, and we make an incision here, and it goes right underneath the neck, and then we're able to, then from there, bring you to another part of the hospital where our goal will be to try to get you off the ventilator and to reverse this. But there's no guarantee that it's reversed. It just depends on how sick you are. Some people live out the rest of their days with this. Some people get lucky and they get better, and we're able to take it out, obviously with certain consequences, but that's sort of the big picture. The next part, along with this, becomes what we call a PEG tube. So you imagine if you're on a breathing machine, like through the mouth or through the neck, eating and drinking becomes very difficult because you have a tube here, but you're not going to have the same food that you were having before. So what we talk about is we put a feeding tube. So this is the person's belly button. This is the tube. Essentially, it's liquid feeds that go directly into the stomach, and that's how you get the nutrition that the patient needs, because they're not going to be able to eat like you and I, and that's because they're on these machines and ventilators.
We are showing these pictures, again, I'm saying not to scare you, but these are the realities of life.
Correct.
At that stage when you cannot, I cannot, our loved ones cannot take care of their own life. They cannot eat, they cannot breathe by themselves. Yes, they look a little bit scary, but this is absolutely needed at that time to maintain the life. This is an important and a good point where we can segue to what happened in the ICU. Many of us say it casually that unfortunately mom and dad is in the ICU, or my brother is in the ICU, my sister got admitted in the ICU. But if you have an experience of going in the ICU, our job today is to prepare you if you are going into the ICU for your loved ones and God forbid for yourself. If you are going in the ICU for yourself, like Dr. Jaffrey said, our job as physicians and nurses, as providers, is to make sure you are not suffering during that time and you can go through that difficult period without even remembering that. Those drugs that Dr. Jaffrey mentioned, by the way, one of the best thing about those drugs is that we induce medical coma in your body. You're not gonna remember majority, almost all of that event. Many a times we interview our patients after the extubation and we ask them, do you even remember what happened? And they say, no. The last time I remember, I was at home. The last thing I remember, my son was talking to me and asking me to go to the hospital. Sometimes they do remember some dreams, which can be good or bad, but they don't remember all those days that they spent in the ICU. Because it's our job to make sure we maintain your functions of the body from top to down. Like for example, Dr. Jaffrey talked about making sure your brain is calm and comfortable while you are going through that difficult phase of your life. So we'll use the medications to make sure you are pain-free and you are in a coma that I can bring you out relatively very quickly. Inside the ICU, by the way, while you are going through that unfortunate life and death situation, you need a lot of help, or your loved ones need a lot of help. We do a lot of procedures inside the ICU. We are preparing you that, God forbid, that time comes, you might see your doctors talking about not only putting the tubes in your mouth so that mom and dad or your loved one can easily breathe, but sometimes your blood pressure might be too very low, and we need to put special lines in your neck or any part of your body to give you special medications. So there are a lot of lines, tubes, and procedures that are done inside the ICU that we will be explaining you. Your doctor's job is, our job is to make sure that we explain to you in plain English what we are intent to do, what is the benefit of this procedure, what is the risk of this procedure. The doctor will talk to you in plain English and get your consent. You have equal right to say yes and no for that particular procedure based upon whether you think, according to doctor's description, this procedure will help your loved ones or not. So you have 100% right of saying yes and no. But if you say no, talk about what are the alternatives, what should we do for these procedures.
Absolutely. So we're going to shift gears into, which is also going to take us into Maulana's talk eventually as well, to some of the terminologies that you may see in the hospital that are legal and medical. So first is what we call DNR. DNR means do not resuscitate. What that means is that you do not want anyone to do CPR on you. Like we talked about the experience, that means no one will press on your chest, no one will, give you shocks, no one will do anything of like when it's your time to pass away, that nobody will interfere and start pressing on your chest. That's called DNR. Dr. Tahseen will get into DNI.
If you remember right from the beginning, we talked about when, God forbid, the body stops, the heart stops, and the lungs will stop. We need to save both of them. So that's why we have separate terms for both of them. DNR will be your heart part. Do not resuscitate my part. Here, the resuscitation means that compression on the chest. Do not intubate means do not put that tube in my mouth and do not put me on a ventilator. Do you see how we differentiated the heart and the lungs? Because there are moments when the lungs can stop without the heart. However, usually the other way around does not work. If the heart stops, the lungs also stop. That's why we differentiate between these two, that you need to discuss, should you want a resuscitation attempt at your heart, or do you want that resuscitation event at your lungs by intubating and putting you on a ventilator? Whose decision this is? Before we go further, we wanted to give you that power. And the whole point of doing this workshop was to prepare you for these moments to come. Whose decision it should be to resuscitate yourself or to put you on an intubation? All of us are living in US and practicing in US, and God forbid if we go to the hospital which are in US. The local law of the land is, it is your decision. It is your body, it is your decision. Do you want that resuscitation to be done or not? We will indulge ourselves a little bit more when we will talk about religious obligations behind that, and we will ask Dr. Maulana about some of the questions. However, the law of the land is, it is your decision. That's why we, the doctors, gonna exercise what you requested us to do with your body during these difficult times.
Introducing a term as we near the close of our segment. So something called palliative care. Sometimes this is a term that we've heard, and I think a lot of people think palliative care means, oh, that's it, I'm dying, I'm on my way out. Palliative care, this is a team that we work with. They're doctors, nurses, and essentially the whole point of palliative care is to provide relief from symptoms of stress and illness. As you can tell, being in the ICU is not a walk in the park. There's pain, there's anxiety, there's a lot of fear, be it for the patient, be it for the family. So palliative care, they help us. We all work together to understand the patient, understand the family dynamic, to help, if you're in pain, how can we do better in treating your pain? For example, you're a devout Muslim, what can we do? Can we play the Quran at your bedside? Can we have a Maulana come and visit you? So palliative care acts as our bridge between the medical jargon and the medical problem and what's practical. Family is important, religion is important, of course, what you're feeling is important. So in case somebody says, oh, for your family, we're bringing palliative care on board, don't be scared. It doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, they're here to tell me that I'm going to die. They're just there to help out the doctors and the nurses and the ICU team to maybe understand the decisions, to help us, maybe my dad never really wanted to be on a ventilator. How can we facilitate, honoring his wishes? Maybe my mother didn't want, these kind of procedures or surgeries. Who can we talk to help us make that happen so we can respect their wishes? This is what the palliative care team helps us do.
This is a very important point Dr. Jaffrey brought up, that usually when palliative care name is taken in the hospitals, everyone gets scared. Does this mean that this is the end of the road? Does it mean a different way of telling that the doctors are trying to give us the message that this is the end of the road? Not necessarily. Palliative care, like Dr. Jaffrey explained, can be a resource for you, family members, and the patient to discuss about these difficult situations. As you can imagine, this is not an easy experience for anyone to go through. Patient aside, for the family members also. Palliative care team comes over there, meet you in person, at the bedside, in the form of family meetings, to discuss these options of the loved one, whether they want this or not, and if they want it, how should we provide it, and if they don't want it, how should we transition from here to what they exactly wanted in the first place? So don't be scared from palliative care. Hospitals have specialized palliative care teams, which are led by palliative care doctors. They have palliative care nurses and support staff available who will be at your disposal. Never, ever, ever think that somebody is forcing you to do something. They will always talk to you in person. They will always give you the options. Remember, the decision making, the law of the land is the decision making is in your hand. All of us, the physicians, the nurses, the palliative care, and any other support staff in the hospital is there to help you to take care of mom and dad or your brother and sister or yourself the best way possible according to your wishes.
So just to now get towards, what are some decisions we can make at the end of our life? One pathway that is possible in the ICU is what we call no escalation of care. So what that means is somebody is very sick in the ICU, maybe things are not getting better, and we say, okay, I think enough is enough. Maybe dad had enough, mom had enough, we don't want to do anything more. So we don't want to add anything more to their care. Meaning, the tube is in the mouth, I don't want to put a tube in the neck. I don't want to do tracheostomy. This is where I draw the line. So no escalation of care means where is the line that you're going to draw? I'm not going to do anything more than that. Now, if the patient passes away, okay. And the way we like to think about it is if the patient is dying, they're telling us that they're ready to go. Meaning that this is the line I'm drawing. I'm not going to add dialysis. I'm not going to add this surgery. I'm not going to add this tracheostomy. I'm not going to add the feeding tube. When the patient, when so-and-so is ready to go, if they're going to pass away, I'm going to let their body naturally pass away, and I'm not going to go further and do more CPR or anything like that. So this is one pathway that I'm sure we'll get into religiously in terms of the fiqh perspective.
I'm going to go one step back. Dr. Mustafa and me live our life here. This is our daily life. This is hopefully not your daily life. Don't get intimidated by this. If, God forbid, you are in a situation where you're in the hospital with your family members, don't get intimidated by all the lines and tubes and machines on both the sides of the bed by this situation. Have a belief, focus on what you are here for, what is your role over here, and ask your physicians, ask your nurses that how they can support you to take care of your loved one in the best way possible. Don't get intimidated by any of these things. Like Dr. Jaffrey said about no escalation of care, God forbid if that point comes where you might be thinking of your loved ones that this is not what they want, or this is not making any headway. In fact, whatever we are doing is causing pain and suffering while taking care of the patient. You can ask your physicians, or they might ask you, are we at that point where we can start thinking what else we can do? This is one aspect which you can talk about, that doc, can you please give us some time? Can I go back home? Can I talk to my wife? Can I talk to my kids? Can I talk to my brothers and sisters? So that we can come up with a better plan, what should we do? This is the time when we are going back, and you know that in your mind, in your heart, that dad or mom or my brother would not be okay with this much support or this much advancement, irrespective of the outcome. You can always request them that, doc, can we just continue what we are doing? Not add more stuff and not take anything back. Whenever, for example, these conversations comes, the biggest fear is in the heart is that we might stop taking care of the patients. We will introduce that term, that's a very common term, pull the plug. We are not gonna do anything different at this stage. If I'm giving a set of medications, those medications will keep on running. If I'm doing a replacement therapy, that replacement therapy will continue happening until we meet again to discuss more. So this is just an intermediary in the middle point that we will continue what we are doing, but we're not gonna de-escalate or take anything down, but just continue what we are doing.
So that takes us into de-escalation. I know Brother Hassan Kazim mentioned pulling the plug. So what we think about is pulling the plug. In the ICU, we call it withdrawal of care. So what that means is, let's say this is a patient, they have a tube in their throat, they're getting treatments. Withdrawal of care means, all right, we're done. We are now going to remove the tube from the patient. Whatever measures they had, life-saving measures, we are going to stop them and remove them. And pulling the plug means that, okay, we're going to remove all of this and then they're going to pass away. This is what we call withdrawal of care. This might be a term that you hear in the ICU. This is an option that people use. We'll obviously get into the religious aspect, but this is a terminology that you may hear in the ICU.
By the way, there is no plug to pull.
Correct. Yeah, that's the other thing.
In the ICU.
Yeah, you don't just go to the wall and you just pull it out. You know? No.
There's no plug to everything. Is battery operated and everything has days of life. So there is no plug, physical plug that we pull. But the sanctity of human life, the dignity of human life, the patients we take care are brothers and sisters, mom and dad, and we feel that relationship, we'll feel that emotion. So during even this stage of the life, when we know that we are not making any headway, we know from our medical knowledge that I am not going in a direction where there will be any meaningful recovery, like Dr. Jafri introduced earlier on. If we are withdrawing that care, we should do it in a most humane, in a most gentle way so that the patient does not suffer. The patient goes through a process in which the life will go back to his creator in a most humane, painless way. And we have a whole procedure of doing it. This is just to introduce you that this point, God forbid, might come. And if this comes, again, your physicians, your nurses will be at your bedside, will be with you, holding your hand, making sure you understand what is going on. And if, for example, you're not able to understand what's going on, you have every right to stop and ask your physician, can you please explain me this a little bit more? There is no rush over here. We will try our level best to sit and explain situation, and no matter wherever you are, we're giving the power to you. Many a times we get intimidated by the surroundings, by the situations, and we sometimes think that, what do I know? The doctor might know better than me. I want you guys to remember this, that you have every right at that stage to stop and ask us, hey doc, I don't even understand what's going on. Can you please explain me in a layman so that I can understand, so I can take a better decision? We will.
There will be, yeah, exactly. So as we transition out from this, before we do a Q&A and then Maulana going into the Islamic laws, the comfort measures was a little bit of what Dr. Tahseen had mentioned. Let's say somebody is passing away. Passing away is not a very obviously pleasant experience. Now, before training, I didn't really know what that meant, but then when you're in the ICU and you see people passing away, you do see that people feel it's hard to breathe. They feel like I'm suffocating. They feel pain. They feel anxious, right? And then when we get to the Malik al-Maut and all that, physically what we see is it's not a very pleasant experience. So comfort measures means what we do is we put you on medications to help bring those symptoms down so you pass with dignity and comfort. If it's hard to breathe, we put you on medicines to make your breathing easier. If you're feeling very anxious, that I cannot breathe, or you're just very nervous, we give you anxiety medicines to help bring that down as well. So this is a term that you'll also hear in the ICU.
There's just a statement, a sentence at the end, and we take it very seriously, ensuring the peace and dignity in patients' final moments. These are the final moments of your life, and many of us have experienced these final moments, seeing them, witnessing them in our family members. But inside the hospital, it might be different because, unfortunately, the patient is going through a very difficult situation, so final moments can be difficult. There is a full process in place in the hospitals. Your doctors are expert in this, that they make sure these final moments are passed in that peace and with full dignity of human life.
I just want to touch upon this point as well. The battlefield is not just the ICU. The ICU, as you can see, is not a walk in the park. It can be a scary place. What we see in about 50% of patients who survive the ICU is that they may have some complication because of it. It's what we call post-intensive care syndrome, and I tend to see this a lot, in patients who come and see me afterwards. Patients, because you're stuck in a bed and you're in a coma and you had so much happen and you've had a lot of disease, you end up with some weakness, physical weakness, you become deconditioned. We also see memory loss in these patients. We see anxiety, depression, and even PTSD. It brings me to a story with one of my patients. When I was in training, I was evaluating this patient to come to the ICU. They were not doing very good. So I told the patient, I said, hey, I think we need to bring you to the intensive care unit. The lady looked at me and she said, please don't take me back. And I said, well, what's going on? She said, I was just there. I'm still getting nightmares. I'm still getting flashbacks as to what happened. Meaning that to me, it sounded like, we usually think about war veterans, PTSD. This can also happen. It's about 50% of people who go through the ICU, being the experience that it is. There are these mental, physical, and psychological repercussions that we do see. Our goal, of course, is to make sure it's a very comfortable environment to limit this. But the reality is this can indeed happen for both the patients and the family as well.
This is for survivals of the ICU. Let's say we make it. Yes, the disease process was bad. Yes, our life was at that situation, but we made it. Allah gave us that opportunity. This was not our time. But yes, the struggle, like Dr. Jafri is saying, continues. Ask your primary care doctors. Ask your lung doctors, ask your intensive care doctor who you are still taking care of you, that what are the resources available for me once I go home. Do not feel that you are alone. Surviving an ICU stay is not an easy thing, which means once you go home, all of these things will be happening, can happen. There's a very high probability of this happening. Don't think this is normal, and do not think that the help is not available. Please ask your primary care doctors, ask your lung doctors, ask your ICU doctors. You can always call them back that I am facing this difficulty. Can you please provide me some help? We have special clinics, especially for post-intensive care syndrome. Society of Critical Care Medicine, American College of Chest Physicians, everyone advocated for that because there is a scientific evidence by providing organized care to patients during this phase will be able to take care of these symptoms afterwards. Let's shift the gears a little bit. We are talking about patients and their experiences. How about your experience as a caregiver? How about you as a caregiver? How about me as a caregiver? If my mom and dad, if your mom and dad, your brother, your sister, unfortunately in this situation and they're in the hospital, providing this intense care day and night can be very taxing, which increases the burnout in you. Believe me or not, your physicians, your doctors in this situation are not only taking care of your patient, but they are also taking care of you and making sure that you as a caregiver do not get into the burnout. So the symptoms can be physical symptoms in you, the exhaustion, the weakness, the confusion, the tiredness, the lethargy, all of these are physical symptoms that can happen in you. Emotional symptoms, the mental repercussions of it, and behavior changes. If these are happenings while you are taking care of your loved ones, this is not abnormal. This happens, but at the same stage, there is help which is available if you are going through these phases.
Absolutely. So inshallah, we're going to proceed with the Q&A. Just a few things to keep in mind from this presentation. Death is a reality for everybody, right? Sometimes we think we're invincible, and this is not going to happen until it happens. CPR is done if the heart stops. Your survival rate is about 15%. DNR means no CPR, that you do not want it. A ventilator is used if you have a breathing problem. DNI means we don't want the ventilator. Of course, contact a religious scholar for consultation, especially when it comes to the Islamic laws. The hospital, and especially the ICU, can be a traumatic place, as Dr. Tahseen was alluding to, for both patient and family. But this is where, as we get into the Q&A, two things that everybody needs to think about. One is, what is important to you? Is it quality of life, or is it quantity of life? Is it the number of days that you have, or is it, what kind of a quality of day that you're having? And the final point, there is no time like now, especially in this program, to think about what would you or your family want to do in this type of situation, because once it happens, we need to make decisions, and make decisions quickly. We're open for a Q&A.
Doctors, I just wanted
Yeah.
to say, Brother Ali is going to pull up the directives too, so if there's medical questions
Absolutely.
related to that, we have that. Welcome
Wonderful.
to the Q&A.
Absolutely. Good. Good. Yeah. Anything medically that we can answer for you in terms of what happens in the ICU? Yes.
Yes.
So, these DNI and DNR directives, is there a form you have to fill out and keep it with you? How does that work?
Well, I'm glad you asked.
Good question.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are multiple forms which can be filled to express your wishes. First of all, you do not need a specific form just to represent your wishes. This can be a verbal communication between you as a patient and your physicians. However, the forms solidifies that belief. The forms before coming to the hospitals and form after coming to the hospitals. Brother Tawfiq distributed and looked into the forms that are signed by you as a patient in the presence of your attorney, in the presence of, for example, the notarized, or in presence of your family members expressing your wish. The whole point is to express these wishes to your family member. So they know, your kids know, your brothers and sisters know, what do you want? If this point comes, do you want to be resuscitated or you do not want to be resuscitated? Do you want to be intubated or you do not? You can definitely put these in these forms. There are specific locations where this specific thing will be there. If my heart stops, what to do, and if my lungs stop, what to do. Let's say you did not sign these forms and you come to the hospital.
So if you come to the hospital without these forms, these are decisions that we can make right in the hospital. So for example, somebody comes in and they're sick, but they're with it, right? They're mentally there, and they're like, you know what? I realize, look, if something were to happen to me from now, I don't want CPR. I would like to be DNR, DNI. That's all you need to say. As long as you have the mental capacity to do so, we can do that order right there in the hospital. Let's say you do not have the capacity to do so. Then I know it gets into some of the legal. Is there, for example, the power of attorney? Is there a healthcare proxy? Is there, a family member, a wife, children, in whatever order according to the state? Who can make that decision for you? That can be off the fly. That can be in the hospital if you do not have those forms. Correct.
And Brother Tawfiq, correct me if I'm wrong. If the durable, it might be part of a question too. If the durable healthcare power of attorney is not signed before a patient get admitted in the hospital, and unfortunately they get admitted in the hospital, can this durable healthcare power of attorney can be signed while you are in the hospital, admitted in the hospital, as long as Dr. Jafri said you have a capacity?
As long as you have legal capacity, which, there are different, there's like a whole test to know whether you have legal capacity or whatnot. But as long as you have legal capacity, then yes, you can still sign them there.
Caseworkers, social workers, are available in the hospital, and this can be part and parcel of your palliative care discussion when they come to talk to you. If you do not have a durable power of attorney, I urge you, strongly urge you, no matter how simple the disease is, or no matter, God forbid, how bad the disease is, if you are admitted in the hospital and you did not sign this durable healthcare power of attorney, which means you did not allocate a next of kin. You have not allocated a specific person who will make the decisions on your behalf if you get incapacitated. Giving you an example, if, for example, you are in the ICU and you are sedated on the machines, are you incapacitated? Yes, you are. You cannot make decisions at that time. If you have not allocated any specific person to make the decisions on your behalf, next of kin rules will be applied. And every state have different. New Jersey, next of kins will go from one relation to the other relation. So I would strongly encourage you, when you're in the hospital for small possible reason, or God forbid a big reason and you're in the ICU, please have your durable power of attorney sign and allocate that person who can make the decision if you are incapacitated during that time.
Going off of that, another form, by the way, that we use in the medical field that you can even take to your doctor, let's say if you don't have an attorney, is what we call a POLST. P-O-L-S-T. P-O-L-S-T. This is called a POLST form. What it is New Jersey on the website, and we'll give you that website, inshallah, when we meet afterwards. It's essentially a medical order for us. And what you do is you fill out this form, and it says, look, my goals of care is I want to just be comfortable. I don't want CPR. I don't want a ventilator. I don't want feeding tubes. And you can do that now while you're making these decisions. And that piece of paper is signed by a physician. Maybe it could be your primary doctor. It could be whoever is equipped to handle that. And that form comes with you. So for example, let's say when you're in the hospital, maybe you are not lucid to make those decisions. You have this POLST form ready to go. Us doctors, we see it. We say, oh, okay, this is signed by this patient. This is signed by a physician. This patient does not want CPR. This patient does not want a breathing tube. We put it right into the computer. So it's called a POLST form, P-O-L-S-T, and you can take this to your doctor and have this officially signed as well.
If your loved one is in an institution, nursing home, rehab facility, or any institution, while that loved one goes from one institution to the hospital, they're always going to be accompanied by this form.
Absolutely.
A POLST form will be there which directs us that this discussion has already happened, whether the patient wants this or not. So this form will always be available.
Good. This is going to be our last question, then we'll move to Maulana for the sake of time. Yeah.
Situation you are in, highly encouraged to ask your provider for that green form, and you can take over from provider from facility to facility.
Jazakallah khair.
Very quick follow-up. So what about before coming to the hospital, the ambulance? These forms apply to them?
If the form is already there and signed, for example, from the last hospitalization, from your conversation with your attorney, when you sign that durable power of attorney, definitely hand it to them.
So let's say, so yes. EMS will come to your house, like the paramedics, the moment they're exactly. One of the first things they ask is, do you have any advance directives? You show them this, it counts. Then they know what to do right from the get-go.
We don't have to go into those stories that, fortunately, we go through on a relatively regular basis, that patient requested not to be resuscitated and nobody knows about that wish. Because that form never accompanied, patient's relative never knew that, or it was not documented. So I urge you to document this, make the forms as durable power of attorney, sign them, have them available, and when the EMS arrives, do give these forms to them and verbally tell them these are the wishes of my father, my mom, And this is their responsibility to give this information to the ED doctors, and it will go directly from one physician to the other physician, and the form will accompany. If the form is not there, at least this verbal communication between you and the EMS personnel, and the EMS personnel to the subsequent physicians will continue.
Wonderful. Inshallah, Dr. Tahseen and I will be available after for medical questions. Thank you.
All right, so just before we move on to the religious considerations, I'm just going to review these forms and to consolidate what was already shared. I'm pretty sure everyone has an understanding of what these terms mean now. And so now we're going to see how all of that theory applies on paper, okay? So once again, the first form is your designation of an agent who has the authority to make that decision for you when you can't. That's a simple, durable power of attorney for healthcare. And it's simple enough. You put your name, you put your agents, agent, successor agents, if those people are not around, and then sign and witness. Simple as that. Then we have this conversation that was brought up in relation to POST. I actually did not know about the POST because, well, I just didn't know about it. And from a preliminary review, it says that a physician, I believe, has to fill it out. So, okay, so there are two different parts or two different factors. One is a physician filling out a POST based off of your wishes. This is to answer the question that was just asked. You are here right now in this masjid. You are at home. Can you state your wishes now? That's what this directive is and was also alluded to by our doctors. So this directive says, this is, do I want quality of life or quantity of life? That's what these two numbers are here for. Do I want CPR, DNR, all those things? These different scenarios are phrased here for you so that you can simulate that for yourself and decide whether you want it or not. So the CPR is right here. And also like fluids and nutrition. Anyone remember what the acronym or what the name was for the nutrition? Oh, come on, please tell me you didn't expect to be quizzed on this.
What was the tube?
What was the tube? Peptide, very good. I asked that because I actually did not remember. So you can specify whether you want the tube or the CPR and to what degrees you want any, all of these things, additional instructions. This is where you put Maulana's name, say consult with Maulana, for example, brain death, all of that stuff, all these instructions you specify now so that you don't have a fumble in that scenario. And you sign two witnesses. This tells the doctor or everyone else around you what you want done, as opposed to like a verbal one. Because if it's verbal, you're going to have different accounts, different narrations, and we know how that works. So these are the two forms, and then the signature part is also very simple, just signature, witnesses, and these are not as strict as like your financial power of attorney that need to be notarized and maybe have the original or whatnot. They just, you sign witness and then they're like, oh yeah, email it to us. And it's as simple as that. I very much appreciated this presentation. In the year 2024, I had to deal with every single one of the things, every single slide, every single bullet point I had to deal with for two family members of mine. Practically lived at the hospital, maybe even more than the doctors. And knowing these beforehand give you a state of mind that you would not have, like in that moment, you would not have understood or maybe able to make the right decisions. So I just wanted to first appreciate and acknowledge that this was absolutely necessary for everyone. Best to be informed before you have to deal with this. Go ahead.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Now, you submit this form to the hospital. Now, you go to another state.
Yeah.
And can this then electronically be transferred to the other hospital?
Yeah, this happens all the time, actually. So people fill out a California form, and then they're in hospital. They're hospitalized in Maryland. Yeah, they just the form still stays valid. And by the way, these forms, they're not the type where you have to fill out this very specific one. It's not like the IRS where you have to fill out, that specific form, or else it's not considered valid. There are all sorts of variations of this. A hospital may have their own variation. As long as it's clear what you are communicating, they'll accept it. So I don't know how hospitals abroad will handle these decisions. What I do know is that, as was stated, that in the United States, you have full authority to make decisions over yourself. I don't know how that applies in other countries. I believe you have the answer.
I would say rather abroad or in US. Unfortunately, here in US also, no two hospitals talk to each other. Dr. Mustafa works in Hackensack, I work in Capital. We do not access each other's system. We don't have access to it, isn't it? The EMRs are so different all over the hospital. The only one institution in US whose EMR talk to each other is Veterinary Hospital, VH. Only and only they will talk to each other. However, none of our hospitals talk to each other, which means you are the only person who will remind the physicians, who will remind the nurses, hey, we signed the form. I will get you that form, but I remember that form said this. They will take your verbal, and during this time, you can always call back home, hey guys, we know the post form was signed by the doctor. Can you please email that form? I am in California, send this form to us. They will be able to. And like Brother Tawfiq said, that they don't have to be a specific form. As long as it is discussed, signed, it is valid. But you are the one who can easily tell at that time that, hey, yeah, I know we are visiting over here. We not have any document with us. However, we discussed this with our attorney. We discussed this with our doctors. And this is my mom's wishes, that we should respect these wishes. And they will 100% accept it.
I also want to share something. You may think, well, let's just say we have a spectrum of legal enforceability of certain things. Okay? So your will be, let's say, executed with the oversight of a judge. Your financial power of attorney is so important that people will sue over that document. Your healthcare directive doesn't have that same level of strict adherence. Okay? And first, I'm going to allude to the communication aspect between hospitals. Not only do hospitals not communicate with each other, internally, sometimes they don't communicate with each other. Ambulances that are coming to pick up your loved one do not communicate. So, like, if you are being called by the same ambulance every single day, they will again ask you for the same exact form every single day, right? Your form may say, do not resuscitate, or it may say full code, for example, like make sure you have everything. That doesn't mean the hospital won't try to convince you or your family otherwise. There are laws, and then there's insurance companies that are kind of trying to gear you into specific types of decisions that are more profitable. Which means, my understanding is that the person you trust the most is the doctor, but there's all these other people involved too. And so you may have a statement of wishes saying, I do not want to be, I want to be resuscitated no matter what because of, let's say, ethical considerations. They may still try to push, just kind of like letting go. And this has happened for cases that I'm personally aware of, where there was a husband and wife, and then the husband was, in the ICU, or just kind of, okay, they're like, well, oxygen rates are going down. I guess this is the end. And then the wife was like, what are you talking about? Get to work, even though it's full code. And then they're like, oh, okay, we'll get to work now. They got to work. That person lived for a few more months after that. But they were just going to let him die. As simple as that. Even though all the legal forms were in place. There's the legal forms, and then there's the enforceability that you have with your presence. Very necessary to have that as well. I don't want you to think that just because you've signed this, no, everything is good. You sign it, you fill it out, you tell your family members what's important to you, and you also have them advocate for you for those wishes. It goes hand in hand. Any other questions? So I would like to kind of transition to Maulana because this is religious considerations on this subject specifically, and then we'll go to, inshallah, Islamic laws of inheritance after that. Please recite aloud salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. First and foremost, I would like to thank all the presenters. Phenomenal job in bringing out this topic. Very important discussion that all of us need to have and need to understand, especially when these things are inevitable and there's no running away from it. La farara min maut. So the slide is only for preparing Islamic will, although Maulana Ali Tawfiq will be going through that later on as well. But from the Islamic perspective, and I'll keep it very short and I'll open up for Q&A because a lot of the Q&A is from the medical perspective as well as the legal perspective may have been directed towards me. So when preparing the final will, so things that I want to talk about is the philosophy behind writing a will. Not that you already haven't understood the importance of writing it, that you need to know the philosophy of it as well, but nonetheless, will in Quran and Hadith, different types of wills, and the important points of setting up a will. So the philosophy is very easy. The falsafa is from the law of inheritance. Not only the family members benefit, but friends can also take advantage. So one of the importance and the philosophies of it is while Quran has stipulated everything that has to be given. See, a lot of times, especially living in this part of the world or in these countries where the Islamic law is not, or the Sharia law is not practiced, writing a will, which is probably the next slide, becomes wajib, obligatory. In itself, in an essence, it's not wajib, it's mustahab and muakkad. But when, for example, if you live in Pakistan or any of the Muslim countries, the laws will be implemented the way Quran states. Or even in India, for example, a Hindu judge will ask whether you want, the Shia or a Sunni way of distribution of the wealth and all these things. So they're aware of it, it's in their constitution, and they'll ask you. So over there, you don't have to worry about leaving a will. But nonetheless, it's recommended. But here in this part of the world, of course, if as he said, nobody will come barging on your door once a person leaves this world and they're going to take over the wealth. But of course, it's important to give directives as to how this has to be distributed. So one of the philosophies behind it is that people benefit. Sometimes a person couldn't do good in their life, and this is an opportunity for them to do good and leave something for those whom they may even not have been in good terms with, right, throughout their lives. Someone you may not have had good relations, and then you stipulate something for them as well. So that sort of serves as that good deed, continuous deed, sadqa jariyah, even after you leave. All these become the reason Islam made will Allah haqqan ala al-muttaqin. So that's for the emphasis. God is considering you to be a muttaqi in this regard. And of course, it was not limited to what was said already, but all the debts and the trust this deceased had, so that nothing is on him when he reaches the bargah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When he's there, he's free, and she's free of all the debts and is free of anything that was their responsibility when they arrive at that last threshold. Quran and Hadith, I recited this ayat in the beginning. Kutiba alaykum idha hadara ahadakumul maut, that it's prescribed unto you when death approaches any one of you, they should leave behind taraka khayran al-wasiyya. Khayr is used over here, meaning that which you're leaving behind is considered to be khayr, something which is good. In the form of a wasiyat. For who? Lil walidain, for your parents, aqrabin, relatives. Bil ma'rufa haqqan ala al-muttaqin. Again, the same concept for the emphasis in an honorable manner, and obligation on the God-wary, those who are muttaqin. And then, of course, the further legal aspect, Sharia aspect of the leaving behind Islamic will is mentioned in this ayat as well. There are other ayat in Surah Nisa that talk about the inheritance, the amount that people get in case someone dies. Detailed account of is mentioned, and that is the reason you would say, well, this ayat right here, Kutiba alaykum, we've learned in many ayat of Quran that begin with the word kutiba implies what? Obligation. So for example, Kutiba alaykum as-siyam, fasting is prescribed unto you, meaning it's wajib. It's not mustahab. You have to fast in the month of Ramadan, of course, if you're capable of doing so. So then why is it that word kutiba over here is not taken as an obligation? The reason is this ayat was probably revealed first, and then the ayat of Surah Nisa were revealed afterwards, which stipulated all the things in which God has already prescribed. This much goes to this much goes to this person. If there are children, the wife inherits this much. If there aren't any children, wife inherits this much, and so on and so forth. Every single detail is mentioned in the ayat of Surah Nisa, so sort of like nasikh and mansukh, right? This ayat was then not abrogated, not removed, but the implication of it as a wujub was no longer applicable. But the word kutiba suggests that it was wajib initially. So again, kutiba alaykum gives apparent meaning of wujub, like the other ayat. I already mentioned that, but it is mustahabe muakkad. A mustahabe muakkad is something which is highly, highly, highly recommended, closest thing to being a wajib, right? And then I mentioned that already. All right. Now that's just the explanation of what I just gave earlier. And then the countries that don't have Islamic law, leaving a will becomes obligatory. So right here in the United States then. Some ahadith in this regard, Prophet of Islam, he said, مَا يَنْبَغِي لِأَمْرٍ مُسْلِمٍ أَنْ يَبِيتَ لَيْلَةً إِلَّا وَوَصِيَّتَهُ تَحْتَ رَأْسِهِ. I think you grew up hearing this, that it is not allowed for a Muslim man or woman to sleep at night without having their will under their pillow, right? That's what it suggests. So you should have that will ready right under your pillow. It's just, of course, used in that تحت رأسه. Again, emphasis on it. من مات بغير وصية مات ميتة جاهلية. Someone who leaves this world without leaving a wasiyat has died an ignorant death. And then the adalat is important as well. A lot of time I've gotten cases where people have come. By the way, people do come, and I have some forms. And I want to give credit to Maulana Sayyid Muhammad Radavi from Toronto, who has established these forms. They're ready. You can use these forms, fill them out. I can help you fill them out. There's the religious aspect of it, and of course the other aspect of it. And the two witnesses, as they mentioned, none of the other things are needed. It becomes a legal document at that moment. And in it, all of these things are mentioned. You just need to calculate, and you need to put it down. And as someone you need to trust and keep it with, I can be that person. You can leave that will with me, and I'll keep it in store until I'm alive. And then I'll pass it down to someone who can take care of that if you outlive me. But a lot of time people come up. This question is arise. Maulana, my children, my sons are, doing better than me. They make more money than me. My daughter is someone who I want to leave everything to. And so I have a son and I have a daughter. I have, for example, hypothetically speaking, $100. 2/3 goes to my son, 1/3 goes to my daughter. If there's no wife involved, of course, there's no wife in it. So that's how it'll be distributed. So my son is a millionaire already. I don't want him getting all this. I would rather have my daughter. So here, what is called a 1/3 clause. You can use that 1/3 clause, and you can give that 1/3 toward whoever you want to. So you can give that 1/3 to your daughter. So after the 1/3 is taken out, the remaining will be then further divided. So $100, 1/3 taken out, 66 that is remaining, that will be further divided between the son and the daughter. And then that 1/3 could be given to the daughter as well. That will definitely increase her share. Or you can bring it about 50-50 for both son and the daughter if you wanted to. And same thing could be done for any of the family members. Or you can give this 1/3 out to whoever you want to. Heck, you can even give it out to the Maulana, as he was suggesting earlier. You can give it to anyone. This 1/3 does not have to be given out to your family members. You can leave that 1/3 to the masjid. After my death, masjid benefits, or the house of worship, whatever you attend, and in charity. And there's nothing wrong with it. But here, the adalat is important. Man adala fi wasiyatihi kana kaman tasaddaqa biha fi hayati. Whoever is adil when they're doing the wasiyat, it is as if they have done the sadaqah in their life. وَمَنْ جَارَ فِي وَسِيَّةٍ لَقِيَ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وَهُوَ أَنْهُ مُعْرِضٌ. But of course, someone who does zulm in stipulating. A lot of time, and I guess this emerges from ignorance, that people just go ahead and distribute their wealth without consulting the religious side of it, and they distribute their wealth however they want to. And that's when these issues come about. There's a story of a man who had children in the time of Rasulullah who died, and before dying, he gave everything in the way of Islam. And people are, mashallah, this and that. Rasulullah arrived. He said, who is this man? He said, this man was a real mu'min and muttaqi and whatnot. Why? Because he gave everything for the sake of Islam and didn't leave anything for his family. Rasulullah said, did you bury him? He said, yes. He said, if I had known this is what he had done, I would not have attended his janazah. I would not have allowed him to be buried in a Muslim graveyard. Why? Because he's done zulm to his kids by not leaving anything for them. So, yes, you want to do charity, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you leave something for them. Why do male children inherit twice as much as female? This has been answered many times. One of the reasons is, you see this slides in multi-languages, Urdu and English. The responsibility that God has placed on the men as opposed to the women. That is the reason. So, for example, if you have a son and a daughter, and you leave this world, son gets twice as much as the girl. Why? Well, why this disparity? Is it not, discrimination, whatnot? Well, the son, if he marries, he has to now provide for the family. If the daughter gets married, she now receives from the husband anyway. So because of the balancing of someone's responsibilities, this is how Islam stipulated it. Some other rules, inshallah, if they come up in the preparing the Islamic will, there are 3 groups that inherit based on the relationship. The first is your parents and your children. Of course, wife is part of each one of these groups. Second, if none of the first group exists, for example, parents are deceased and a person doesn't have any children, then it goes to the second group, which is your grandparents, paternal and maternal, and as well as the sisters and the brothers. In absence of sisters and brothers, their children. If any one person is alive, next group does not inherit. Third group is your, again, I've written it in, for people can understand chacha and chachi and all that stuff. So your maternal and paternal uncles and aunts, they are the ones who will be the recipient of it. So these are the 3 groups. Of course, if the first group, anyone is from the first group is alive, nothing goes to the second. And wife is included in all 3 of these groups. So it's not like if wife is there, then, and nobody is here from the first group, and the wife is there, then the second group still inherits, and wife gets her share. If nobody is here from the first and second group, wife is there, she inherits her portion, and then the rest goes to the third group. How do I inherit from each other? Again, these are some of the details. I don't want to go into their distribution of the things that you must take care of. Your burial-related issues, other damages that may have been done, if there are any zakat or fitr or kafaras that are upon you, religious obligations. And I have these forms available. Again, detailed version. You can find this on the book of Ayatollah Sistani's Islamic laws. All this is right out of the ayat of Quran. These, the 50% and 25% and 33%, all of this. In fact, Maulana Sayyid Muhammad Razavi has put together a very nice booklet, Islamic will, how to make Islamic will. And he goes through all the divisions. So you think of a division, 3 sons, 2 daughters, whatever you think of a division, pretty much has included all of them in there for one to make sense of their family structure. Again, same thing. Many of this, of course, I'm not going to run through this. You can ask me. These are the forms that are available. One from the Office of Ayatollah Sistani Imam. It's a very compact little form that they have. And the other one is from Maulana Sayyid Muhammad Razavi. I have the PDF of both of these files. If anyone is needs it, they can give me their email address, and inshallah, I can share it with them. And this is how the one that Maulana Razavi has prepared. Just a couple of pages of it. It's 20 pages, so you can see 20 pages. But a lot of it's just the explanation, and that's what we need. We need explanation every step of the way. Just forms without explanation could be difficult to understand. That was just the will part that I wanted to talk about, but there were, of course, discussion pertaining to, medical ethics as well, that some of the questions were being raised. Rule of thumb, when it comes to, these DNR and other practices, Islam has a very straightforward formula, and there's no condition in which a person's will should be executed if they say DNR in their will, and that is something to be disregarded. If a Muslim puts in his will that I want to practice DNR, in case my kidneys are failing or whatever the case may be, last stage, I don't want them to, that has to be disregarded if there's a possibility of saving that person's life. That is just the rule of thumb. Now, of course, how much of it is possible? Doctors, again, they'll try and tell you the same thing. They say, well, if we perform the CPR, this might damage their ribs. It might break them. And the person is already 90 years old, and we further do this, we're going to be causing more damage to their body. And then, of course, the quality of life that is afterwards. All that will be there. They'll be giving you these, facts which are true. But should you follow them? No. If there's a life at stake and a person needs resuscitation, that has to be performed. Whatever care that could be given at that last moment has to be given, cannot be pulled, cannot be removed, cannot be stopped under no circumstances. At least Ayatollah Sistani does not give any consent to anyone sort of like pull the plug. Pulling the plug is not an option under the rules of Ayatollah Sistani. Now, how much practical it is when it comes to dealing with the doctors, and of course, working that out, you try your best, you tell them. I had personally gone through this as well with my own father 3 years ago. Now, nothing wrong, there's no HIPAA policy over here. So he had pulmonary fibrosis, and lungs were failing. At this point, actually, doctors said that putting this person on intubation will do very little good, because when lungs are already bad, what intubation is going to do? Yeah, if it's something else, brain-related or heart-related or other organs that are failing, then yeah, intubation would make sense. So we said, well, yes, he's quite old. He was already 80 plus, and we wanted it to be as simple as possible for him. But we were, as Maulana was referring to, approached by not physicians, but those who were ahead of the physicians, trying to give us hopelessness. That why delay? We should just end it right now. And there's nothing remaining. And we were very adamant about it. No, you're going to give care till the last moment. And we're not going to pull off from this. So, of course, they listen to you. They cannot do anything aside from whatever you tell them. They're going to go ahead and follow. Otherwise, there'll be lawsuits that are waiting to happen. So with that said, your duty is, according to Ayatollah Sistani, DNR and all these things, the CPR, anything that is needed to save a soul, because a Muslim soul is resting upon it. Now, a lot of times physicians, they might have this question as well as to what is our duty when it comes to doing these things. So as far as, there's a disparity, of course, someone might say, well, the life of a Muslim, we regard that to be not superior, but muhtaram, right, respected, as opposed to a life of a non-Muslim. Again, don't take the sentence loosely. Every life matters. But here now, we're not talking about every life matters. We're talking about what is our duty towards a Muslim. So if a non-Muslim has a directive towards you and you have to follow that, there's nothing wrong in that. But if there's a Muslim's life that is depending on that, then you don't need to follow that directive. And that will, even if the person has willed that I don't want DNR, but there's a possibility of saving that person by doing CPR, the will can be disregarded and should not be followed in that area. I may have answered a few questions without them being asked. So if there are any questions aside from what I have already addressed, please go ahead.
Yes. What about organ donation after the person passes? This is also written in those forms.
Yes. Ayatollah Sistani, again, we're going to stick to his fatwa only. He gives permission. A person can donate organs as long as they're alive in their lifetime, keeping in mind that something that they donate does not harm them while they're alive. So, of course, things that you have two and you can give and live on one, you can give. Someone cannot go ahead and say, well, take my heart while I'm still alive. That'll put your life in danger. So that is something possible. But after death of a person, only to save a life of another Muslim, the organs can be extracted and given. If a Muslim's life is dependent, and then this person who's dying or who is dead, for example, their organs can be used to cure or to provide to another Muslim. But other than that, he does not give any permission. No, no. Doesn't matter, Muslim. When it comes to, again, it's going to be non-Muslims, there's nothing wrong. You can take anything from their body. But from a Muslim, if the person, even if they have in their directive, that wasiyat is not valid. That someone might leave and say, well, I don't need these. I can just donate everything when I die. That wasiyat cannot be fulfilled and should not be fulfilled. But only if there's a matter where a Muslim's life is dependent upon it, only in that scenario, these organs can be extracted. It cannot be used for example, learning purposes, testing purposes, or we want to test out this organ for teaching purposes. Not permissible.
I don't know if legally you can say, I donate my organs to a Muslim. So that means in this country you cannot donate your organs to anybody.
Yes, yes.
Because legally you can't say only.
Yeah. Yes.
If it's not organ donation, what about corneal transplants? Can that be given or there is not?
So again, if it's an organ, what is the corneal transplant?
It's a tissue transplant, so not only cornea, but any part of your body can be transplanted.
Yeah, I mean, I thought cornea, you're not very invasive, it's kind of more
But it
superficial.
only happens after your death.
Yes, after the death.
It is only and only after death. No transplantation happens or no recruitment happens before if the patient is living. It will be only happening after that, but it will come under the definition of an organ.
Same definition,
It's
yes.
not an organ like only heart, lung, kidneys,
Just
part
you
of the
can-
body.
It's like a lens.
Yes, it would fall under the same category. Sheikh Sayyid.
One question I have.
Yes.
This is a very difficult thing when you are given the option of DNR or DNI. So for a person who is like son or daughter and his parents are in the hospital and they're going away and it's very difficult to give the permission to doctor to pull the plugs, right? So in this situation, don't you think that this is more difficult rather than a person passing away at his own without any incubation or without any
So there's one side of it, which is, if we don't do any of these things, the person will peacefully leave and all that stuff. True, that aspect of it is there. But if there's a possibility of saving a soul by performing these actions, then every single bit of care has to be provided until the last moment. And while it might be painful sometimes, it may not be the best solution. But again, doctors, at this point, their intervention and their knowledge should come into play as well. And a lot of time it does come into play. They say, well, there's really no future in this, or there's really no good quality of life, even if the person survives. They're probably going to be bedridden. May it be, when it comes to children, they might be looking at from another aspect that people raise is the cost of it, right? In countries where Medicaid and Medicare is providing for it, you don't worry about it. You want to keep him on it. But if the money is going from your pocket, then it's like, how long can we keep this going? So if it becomes overburdened and burdensome, and then those become exceptions. And the doctor is also suggesting that there's really no quality of life afterwards. This person will be in the vegetative state, for example. Just the ventilators, keeping them alive. Everything else is pretty much dead. So the definition in Islam, brain dead is not dead. The definition is when the heart stops, that person is considered to be dead. You had a question first, yeah.
Just following up on Brother Hassan's question, this idea that Muslims can only donate to other Muslims whose life is in danger, their organs. So I'm not sure if it's legally permissible in America to
Yeah, so the question is, for those who are listening online, that while the rule and the law is that Muslims' organs can only be used and extracted, a dying Muslim's organs can be used only to save a life of another Muslim, then why not create some sort of, bank or something where these organs can be kept or used in case, for example, a Muslim is in, or there's always someone who's in need. So I don't know if keeping them is permissible. That's the issue. Only the aspect if a person is immediately in need, only in that scenario. It really limits it down to glim possibility. And maybe Sayyid Ali could add something to it.
This is there's a part of, there's law and then there's like the practicality of it. So anyone can put on these forms, I'm going to limit it to specifically Muslims to receive the organs. Whether or not that's going to happen or not is not clear. So if you look at the language that's used, it says indicating your preference to who the person or the institution that your organ is going to be given to. These are a lot of these things are statements of preferences, and then unfortunately they might say, overruled, we can't make it work, it's too complicated. So there's no harm that I see in putting it on these forms for Muslims, or just kind of putting a transcript of what Maulana said onto this form. But yeah.
Working on it is okay. That's permissible for learning purposes. But that act itself was not allowed. So if something happened, then yeah, and someone did that out of ignorance. If it's within your means to go ahead and give respects to it and bury it, that should be the first thing. But of course, you're in a hospital, you're in a medical school, you're just learning it, and this is right there used, the cadavers and all those. So yeah, it'll be okay. It'll be permissible. Medically, it would not be advisable, and of course, ethically speaking, a person is allowed to make decisions for themselves. But here, why would someone refrain from getting the help if they can? So, Aql suggests, here may not be a fatwa or anything, but the Aql suggests that you should seek out the necessary help, especially if it could be helpful in saving your life, personal life. So you got to treat your life just like anyone else's life as well. It's muhtaram, it's respected. And not getting that help is ethically wrong. May not be haram, but it's ethically wrong. No, not that I remember, no. Yes? So that is an area which is an exception to organ donation. Yeah, that is permissible, not a problem. In fact, there were discussions of ayanun najis, so things that are najis, can they be sold and bought? So blood is najis, but this is one exception that is permissible. Yes.
Even to non-Muslims? Like you
Yeah.
donate your blood to
No. Anyone? No problem. It will not be produced. Good point.
I was just getting some text questions just to clarify about some of the goals of care. So just to make sure we understood it correctly. So let's say somebody so what we see in the ICU, people are actively dying. They're in multi-organ failure. They have cancer. We know that they're not going to make it. So in that sense, is it okay? Of course, pulling the plug, we don't, agree with, we don't believe in, but no escalation of care. That, like I know you were saying, if the physician feels that this is futile, they're not going to come out of this, is it then okay to say, okay, we're not going to escalate care further if there's going to be, let's say, no quality or even quantity of life, we know they're not going to survive. Is it okay then to set the cap and say we're not going to escalate care further?
That is something which is, yes, has been debated and addressed, and there are some leniency from some of the other maraji, like Ayatollah Makarim Shirazi and others have said and suggested this, that it is okay to just, let it be whatever the maximum that you could have done. And in the medical, spectrum, that is all, and again, you said the life would be futile afterwards, and they have given such permissions that you can stop at some place. Ayatollah Sistani is very difficult in this. I'm not saying he's saying difficult in the wrong sense, but he's very strict in this. He wants the care to be given till the last moment. Sometimes in the other maraji, they actually say if someone is, not saying any age limit is too much. If a person is 95 years old, 100 years old, he says even then you've got to provide the care till the last moment. But until a physician, suggests that this is it, that's where the cap should be, then their word can be taken for that. Yes.
Maulana, thanks for sharing your story. And believe me, we live in a polycultural environment where your physicians take care of patients and family members who belong to different cultures. And every culture, believe me, comes with their rules and regulations and laws. If you talk about New Jersey, we were talking to sister before, in New York, physicians and hospitals know about these complexities, and we also know that all power belongs to you. Your physicians will listen to you. Never get intimidated by someone asking you to do something. Nobody can force you to do something. Your job is to sit with your physicians, have that meetings with them, and tell them your point of view. And like Maulana said, nobody will go against your wishes. They will always listen to you, so all power is with you. Never feel that you are getting overrun by the hospital or anyone else. The power belongs to you because it is your representative, it is your body, you will be representing it, and you can easily tell them about your choices.
I think, Sayyidi had alluded to it. Sayyidi had alluded to it that, there are insurance companies involved, and there are other, they need to vacate this bed and to get someone else, and all these other things that are not in the control of physicians who are attending to it. So yes, while that is the case, that's unfortunate aspect of it. You have the last say in it, nonetheless.
Okay, so inshallah, while we transition into the following component of Islamic laws, I do want to, you know how we have like know your rights trainings for like police and other things and whatnot? I'm gonna do an ad hoc version of that in relation to the medical practice. Okay. Be very clear with the hospital personnel what it is that you authorize and what it is that you do not. Do not say, maybe this might be a good idea, and then just kind of leave it at that. No. You say, I do not authorize this until I think about it further, or I do not know. Very, very clear answers, because you may be giving authority implicitly, or you may be allowing them to use that to consider, continue their own judgment, their own, not necessarily medical judgment, but financial judgment, into a certain treatment that may not be okay. And I'm not saying necessarily doctors, but whatever the hospital staff are. So be very clear. If you are not sure about what it is that you want for treatment, you say, I do not know, let me ask some questions. I will get back to you later. Plead the fifth, if you will, in the medical version of that. Because the pressure is real. Please recite a very loud salawat as we transition into the next stage. Okay, so as I move out of this, one of the things that was kind of mentioned is the background that I have is there's both a legal background and a fiqh background, and I understand very well that there is a dichotomy that we Muslims in America face. It's not easy to have Muslim laws applied in a society that doesn't care about Muslim laws. What we do have is you can do whatever you want, okay? And that gives everyone a choice to apply Muslim law or not to apply Muslim law. We have that in some areas. We don't have that in all areas, okay? For this presentation, I have two humble requests. Number one, if you have a pen, paper, or the back of your plate, it doesn't matter, please take notes. If there are pens, please provide or write down. If you do not have a pen, one will not be provided for you, but you can use your phones instead, inshallah. Number two, be prepared to pull out Qur'ans, even if that's a Qur'an app. It is important that we refer to Islamic laws through the Qur'an, wherever possible. So I will be asking you all to read the actual text and the verbiage of the Qur'an, not the rules necessarily. You let me handle the rules, you handle the Qur'an, inshallah. So, with that in mind, one of the objectives that many of us have as Muslim Americans is to figure out how we can fulfill those obligations within this country. And AMBA provides a lot of those resources, the American Muslim Bar Association. And my wife and I also are preparing certain workshops and other things under the guise of the Islamic Law Institute. And so the inheritance workshop, or inheritance, is something that we have focused on. There's marriage and divorce. There are a lot of other areas. And so we have a fuller version of this workshop that is that some of you may have attended 2-3 months ago. What I am going to do is ask you all right now to open up the Quran and do a little exercise with me. Surah Baqarah, verse 183. Now this was mentioned by Maulana on multiple occasions today. One in the very beginning, one in the middle, just 30 minutes ago. But I want it to really to settle in your hearts, inshallah. Everyone knows this verse. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم. Now, Maulana already discussed some of these points. I wanted you all to visualize it. I'm not going to really go into detail. So, كتب عليكم الصيام, some of the rules related to it. Now, go back a few verses. That was the verse that Maulana recited in the very beginning and discussed it 30 minutes ago. Now, in the context of Siyam, us Muslims in America, we do a pretty good job. Even our businesses are open late just to accommodate for all the fasting that happens. Wasiyah, and based off of the survey that was given beforehand, the majority of the Muslim population, not just the ones attending this conference, by majority I mean 90%, do not have an estate plan or a will in place. Putting the fiqh component aside of whether it's haram to not have a will, we have the language already mentioned. Now, did anyone look a few verses before that? Kutiba alaykumul qisas. So, it kind of shows the value or the emphasis that Allah puts on certain rules and regulations. Out of these three, what percentage of these out of the three, how many of them are Muslims in America applying? Well, 1, for sure. 2, 10% of Muslims. 3, absolutely not. I believe back in the day, maybe 100 years ago, certain state legislation had this concept of qisas to some extent. But we can't touch the criminal justice system of the United States, but it shows Allah cares about this. But what I do, just throwing this out there, if you were to survey Muslims in America, how many of them would, let's say the state legislator of New Jersey decides to propose new legislation for qisas, how many Muslims would support it? That's a question that I would like to know the answer to as well. My answer is that it's not 100%. So I just wanted to have that little exercise there with the verses. And so we're going to do a little recap on the difference between state law and Islamic law. As Sister Zainab mentioned earlier, we have this thing called intestate. Who knows what that means? There we go. You die without a will, what happens? And so she mentioned New Jersey law, New York laws. I'm not going to quiz you on that. They were very technical and specific. But for the most part, it's spouse and children, you know? Islamic law. We also have intestate laws, the default rules. Whatever those are, they're not the same as the state. So if you pass away without a will, you're not passing away according to Islamic guidelines. So, thankfully, we have this thing called the dead hand doctrine. Anyone knows what the dead hand doctrine is? No one does. But I'd like to ask if anyone has a good guess. It's very similar to the medical profession. Remember where you have 100% authority to make decisions as to what happens to your body? You have 100% authority to give it to whoever you want. So you are dead, but you have a hand in everything. That's the American inheritance model. Specific to America and a few other countries in the world, not everywhere is like this. So you just need to recognize that this is limited to the United States. If you have questions about other countries, I don't have the answers to that. In the Quranic laws, we have up to how much discretion? 1/3. The rest of it, God determined it. And I use the word wasiyah because that's the word he uses, yusikumullah. So that has already been predetermined. Up to 1/3, that's your wasiyah. Give it to whoever you like. And so if you wanted to live as a Muslim in America and abide by inheritance guidelines, what do? How do you put them together? Simple. You just make a will or an estate plan, give 1/3 to whoever you want. Family, friends, neighbors, dogs, and cats. And then the rest of 2/3 go to whatever. Islamic guidelines. Okay. Now, a few things that were mentioned by Maulana. I'm just going to go over them in a way where I'm also expecting you to write them down. So, what is step 1 for an Islamic estate plan or an Islamic will? Or what happens if you were to pass away today? You calculate your debts. Your debts go out first. And that means religious debts, Islamic debts, whatever. Credit card debts. They make sure you don't forget it. Step 2. Your wasiyah, your 1/3. Whoever you want to give it to. So I want you to all think this through right now. I don't want it to be conceptual. Right now, conceptualize or kind of list in your mind your debts. List in your mind who you want to give that 1/3 to. Masjid-e-Ali, Masjid-e-Ali, Masjid-e-Ali. Maulana, Maulana, Maulana. That's what we call waswas. Step 3, you calculate the family inheritance rules. All right? Any questions so far? Yes.
If you live in the United States but you are not a citizen, still the laws applies to you?
It's a little complicated. There are certain things that apply, certain things that don't apply. It depends on like how much property you have, if you're a resident. That's a conversation for, I can't give specifics right now. But if you have property in the United States, you're a resident of the United States, for the most part, they apply to you. Yes?
If your property wealth is not enough to cover the debts, who's responsible after that?
No one is responsible for your property if your debts outweigh your assets.
But from a Shariah perspective, isn't it the oldest son that's responsible?
My understanding is no. It's not that the oldest son has to pay from his pocket to cover the debts of the eldest. That's my understanding. I may be wrong on this. There are certain obligations that come. Do you have any comments on that specifically? Okay, so we'll get back to Maulana, inshallah. But my understanding is that, no, the eldest son does not need to personally cover the debts of things. And then I also want to differentiate. We have debts from debts. We have like student loan debts, Medicaid debts, credit card debts, and then we have, you loan someone in the community some form of debt. I'm not going to answer that question as to which one is more important, but you get the idea. And, okay, so we're moving on. We're just going to put this on paper with actual numbers. Be ready, okay? So let's say I pass away with $2,000 to my name. You know, the average American dream. What's the first thing that goes out? The debts. So I have done very well, and so my only debt is $500. But everyone fills this section out because we live in the United States. As in, we all have debt. Let's suppose that I give $500 to whoever I want. That's up to 1/3. I cannot go more than that. How much am I left with? 1,000, and that 1,000 goes to your family. But this portion is discretionary. So you don't have to use it. And 1,500 goes to your family based on those rules. Okay? So far, so good? The numbers make sense? Okay. Inshallah, over the next few slides, I'm going to get the math engines rolling. So be prepared. Yes? Very, very good question. So we have this thing called rahn, which is like a secured debt, if you will, and different cultures, different countries call rahn things differently. You know, the rahn that's applied in Iran may not necessarily be the rahn that is applied. Anyways, so we call this a secured debt, okay? And the rules are slightly different. I'm not going to go into detail, but as it applies to us, I'm just going to give you the practical component. It doesn't have to be paid off immediately when it transfers to the kids. So you all know about a due on sale clause that's in your mortgages. The moment you sell your home that has a mortgage, the mortgage company will escalate that and say, you got to pay the whole money up front right now. Because you're selling the house, you're about to get a chunk, and they expect that. That's not the case if you pass away, both Islamically and legally. So it goes to the kids. All that matters is that the debt is continuing to be paid. And it's up to them. They say, well, I can't support that debt. Oh, wait, they sell it, and then they execute that due on sale. Well, not due on sale, but, the escalation of the mortgage. Next. So, open the Quran, Surah Nisa. Yes, yes. Yes. As in, does it end up in step 3 where it goes to inheritance? Yes, yes, it does. So you have to sell the house and distribute the money? Do you have to liquidate? No, not necessarily. What matters is that the rights are observed. The shares are preserved. It's not necessarily that you have to sell everything and then distribute. So a lot of times, let's say I'll give an example. There are 3 houses, and you have 2 kids. House 1 and house 2 are worth the same as house 3. You can give house 1 and house 2 to one kid, house 2 to another kid. That's not, we don't. It's not as simple as that, practically speaking. But the idea is the shares are preserved. Liquidation is not needed.
Okay, so essentially, someone will have to assess.
Yes.
The cost or the value of all your assets, house, car, jewelry, all that stuff.
Correct. The assessment of your assets is both built in the court process, surrogate court, probate court, as we call it, and within the Islamic process. Yes.
Are you saying so like you have to create the title, like ownership title, 40% of this child, 60% of this child, to make sure that you're doing it correctly?
I will get to that. There's a lot of nuance to that in how it looks practically speaking. The simple version is yes. If you have 2 children and there's a difference in the distribution, like 40% to one, 60% to another, technically, yes, you give 60% title to one and 40% title to the other. However, there are other ways which are more advisable. Because if someone passes away, how many people want 6 people's names on the title of a deed? That's a nightmare. There are other ways of navigating that. And so the goal is to figure out how we maintain the shares without and maximize the legal methods of doing so. Yes.
So for the mortgage repayments, would that be considered in the debt portion? Like, can that be consolidated in debt? Like as you're going,
Like the principal and equity, can it be a debt?
well, so to pay the mortgage, can that be considered as part of the debt? Because that's the first part that you pay, right? Before going into the division.
You can. If you don't mind, I'm going to answer that question maybe at a separate time. Yeah, it gets a little bit more complicated there.
So there's a ruling number 2793 in the book of At-al-Sistani. If the deceased has a debt equal to his estate or more, the eldest son must give those things, like the remains of the that are left specifically to the eldest son that belong to him to settle the debt, or he must pay their equivalent worth from his own wealth. So that would be the responsibility.
Okay, good. So the correction, you were absolutely right. Yes.
So you have, life insurance. You have life insurance in case of somebody dies?
Yes, yes.
Company will pay you.
Okay, so life insurance policies generally, and I know there's a lot of different types of life insurances out there, and I don't know all the different variations, but my understanding of the research that I've done and the scholars that I've consulted with is that life insurance, the premium that you're paying is actually a gift. Okay, and that payout is not part of your estate. So you are giving a gift during your lifetime in which a certain person is a beneficiary, and it is not considered as part of your estate. That is my Islamic understanding of how life insurance is applied. It does not fall under an inheritance or as part of your estate. You were shaking your head so hard, I thought you were going to say I'm wrong there. That money belongs to whoever that gift was assigned to, the beneficiary. So if it was gifted to your wife, to your child, that's who that money belongs to. Yes? Life insurance, homes, that's a different conversation if you don't mind. Kind of we can shift that because that's more of homes, not estate planning. Yes?
Also 401ks and your retirements, you have a money
Yeah.
in there, and that money, you have a beneficiary
Yeah.
before you sign up.
Yeah.
So is that one, whatever you have accumulated all your life, is you pay the tax to the state and the federal law?
Yeah.
How about when your children will get it, they have to pay the home side?
Well, that's more of a homes question, but generally retirement accounts are your money, and so it's part of your estate. So I'm going to ask everyone to go to this verse right now. Did you all pull it up? Alhamdulillah. Okay, good. So here's the verse. I'm also pulling it up here. This is immediately after the verses of inheritance in the Quran. So Surah Nisa, page 1 on the traditional Uthman Taha script has nothing to do with inheritance. Page 2 and page 3 are about inheritance. The last line, it's like, this is the conclusion here. تلك حدود الله ومن يطع الله ورسوله يدخله جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها وذلك الفوز العظيم. If you follow these lines, if you follow these fractions, if you make sure that your family gets their shares, you're going to heaven with all that it has to offer. And what comes after heaven? If you do not follow these lines, if you disobey, you cross the lines, your percentages are off. God's words, not mine, you're going to hell. He will admit him. So you're not going, you will be admitted into hellfire to abide therein. And this is pretty strong language for inheritance. The first time I read this, I was like, wow. This is not your typical, whatever. So if you were to pass away today and your inheritance does not go based on Islamic law, does it? And you had the opportunity to ensure it goes by Islamic law, what does that say? It's a hard thing to consider. So I'm going to ask you all a general question. Can you disinherit a child? You can legally. What happens Islamically? Can you disinherit your parents if your parents say, don't put me in your will, I don't want what you have? So I'm going to rephrase my question. Do you have to say, parents, you have to take it? It's a right. It can be waived. If your parents don't want that money, they can waive it. But when do they have the power to waive it? When you pass. It doesn't have to go into their account and then they waive it. They could say, no, I don't want it. You don't have to come and give it to me. And if you rely on that, so be it. Okay, so you got those. And then Maulana said that 1/3 discretion, you can use that to modify some of the conclusory distributions, right? So if you have a certain child that's really doing a lot for you and you want to give them more, you use from that 1/3. There are avenues for that, not to disinherit. The disinheriting part is a very, very, very grave sin. And it's not just sin, I can tell you it has a lot of emotional, familial consequences. Where, if for whatever reason, that good-for-nothing child of yours, in the way that you're thinking of it because you're disinheriting them, if they were already off the path, you have solidified that by disinheriting them.
I think there is an exception. God forbid, if someone's child converts to another religion from Islam.
Well done. We'll get there. Okay. Yes. Okay. Now, I wanted to transition into a specific conversation I want to have about we're Muslims, we care about the verses of the Quran, we want to apply those in our life. How do we do it here in the state of New Jersey? I'm going to tell you what I did, and you can tell me how you judge me. I took one of these template forms. I did it in California 3 years ago, and then I did it in Maryland just a few weeks ago, the same exact thing. I wrote everything to my wife. Signed, witnessed, valid, legally binding. That's it, I'm done. My question for you is, am I going to hell? The looks I'm getting right now. And that's exactly what's going to happen, by the way. If I pass away, I made sure that the beneficiary of all of my accounts is my wife, and I made sure that my will says everything to my wife. And I made 2 versions just to solidify that. So no dispute there. I feel like you want to say it, but you're afraid to say it. I have children. I have parents. I have a child, not children, but yeah. Basically, what I'm doing is that legally she has full entitlement and has all access and it's all hers. But I'm entrusting her to give my family their share. And so I am treating her Islamically as my wasi, as my executor. But legally, I don't want anyone to take her to court over this. That's one method. For a lot of people, that may be the preferred method. And there's a lot to discuss on this in terms of the complexities of the legal system and how spouses are incentivized to receive money on each other's behalf and do things. And the law allows for a lot of that. I'll put that all aside. For many of you, that may be the route you take. Let's suppose my wife says, after I'm gone, psych. Joke's on him, he's gone now. Can't do anything about it. Now am I going to hell? She's going to hell? No, please, please. Well, I will share that the language that the Quran, even the Quran addresses this. The language that is used for someone who does not give the inheritance is the basing hell, torment, and all that stuff. But I have basically, and in the verse that you all read today about the kutiba alaykum al-wasiyya, and then the next line says, فَمَنْ بَدَّلَهُ بَعْدَ مَا سَمِعَهُ فَإِنَّمَا إِثْمُهُ عَلَى الَّذِينَ يُبَدِّلُونَهُ. In Allah Samir Alim. So I have embedded this wasiyya within her, as in like these are my wishes, make sure my family gets their share so that I don't go to hell. And if she decides to go against that, change it, whatever, the ithm Ith means the sin is on her.
But you are giving her that option, instead of complying. So this may,
You're saying I'm giving her the option to sin? Is it?
I mean, you could do it in a different way.
Yeah.
Having a separate receipt, so you can divide it separately. You are opening the door for corruption, right?
Correct.
And you are the sabab. In this case, you will also.
You're saying I'm opening the door to corruption. I am responsible for even trusting her to do this. Well, I will go with that example. Let's suppose I don't have that relationship with my family. Whether it's my wife's not around, I don't have a specific child that I think will 100% execute, or I don't want to give the perception that you can give it to someone else. Consult a tax professional first, but you can give it to a sibling, to a parent, to a friend. You're finding one trustworthy individual to take legal title for everything. Yeah, and I could be a sabab for that too. Like, there's no way I can avoid that, right? Or is there? That's where I'll get to method 2. If you're not in that position to apply method number 1, if for whatever reason you're afraid that your family is going to fight, and by whatever reason I don't want it to seem like an anomaly, what are the 2 highest conflict areas in law and in Islam? Divorce and inheritance. Dying is like going through a divorce for the family. Whatever you've heard about the terrible things that happen in divorce in the legal system here, apply that to inheritance. What I've also noticed is that Muslim divorces are more nasty than the American divorces. I'm telling you this, inheritance the same way. I'm saying this from personal experience, from seeing this with all the different clients that come my way. So method number 2 is you take the wills that were provided for you, the Islamic ones, the ones that say all the fractions and the formulas and percentages and whatnot. And it goes based off of that. But now you have the force of law over it. So the judge is now going to implement the Sharia because you had the right to do so. Exceptions apply. So you understand the 2 different variations of this? And you may want to do something that is not, black or white. It could be something in between. You can have everything from these assets to go to this person, and then you have beneficiaries for certain other assets. You can use trusts. There's a lot of legal mechanisms that you can use to ensure that your Islamic obligations are fulfilled. Consult an attorney. And this is where I say my disclaimer. I am an attorney. I am not your attorney. Unless we are in that attorney-client capacity and relationship, which is not right now. So what I am telling you to do, if at all, is not legal advice. I'm informing you of what things are available. Now, in terms of executing, and I know the English language, we have a thing about phonetics. The same word can be read 2 different ways. The executor versus the executor. But they are executing your will, not you. Different person. If the will tells you to do something you cannot do, now what? Whether that thing is illegal, impossible, or haram. Good. Anything that's not possible is not wajib on you. Okay. But the Quran specifically addresses that if there is even a fear that this wasiyah that has come about is going to result in sin or something impossible, there's a way out. فَأَصْلَحَ بَيْنَهُمْ. So there's this story that was mentioned by Maulana about the Holy Prophet referring to that person who said, I've given everything away in Islam, right? We have multiple ahadith about specific companions of the Imams that said, I 100% give all of my assets to the Imam. So many of us think that we know what's best. Is there anything best better than giving all of our money to the imam? In your mind, conceptually, that's how we're raised, right? Or to Masjid-e-Ali? Don't answer that. This happened in the time of the Ahlul Bayt. Not Masjid-e-Ali, but Imam Ali, or one of the other imams. A companion said, 100% of my assets to the imam, here's my wasiyah, done. They picked up all the assets, they took it all the way to the imam, and the imam was like, here's my third. The other 2/3 goes to the family. That's a modification. A necessary modification by the imam himself. Now, if the legal will tells you to do something, don't just disregard it thinking that there won't be consequences. Consult with an attorney if you're not going to go, if you have questions about the will. Okay? Don't just be like, oh, that's haram, I'm not doing that. Consult with an attorney before you put yourself in trouble. All right, so at this point, this was also mentioned, I'm just putting a visual. Who inherits from you? From that 2/3 section, who inherits? We're gonna start at the top left. Both your spouse and your blood relatives. You have the first degree relatives that go first, and your spouse. So regardless of whether you have blood family or not, your spouse inherits. However, depending on what type of blood relatives you have, well, there's a hierarchy. If you have parents or children, stop here, do not pass go, do not collect 200. Stop right there. Next, if you do not have parents or children, you go to grandparents and siblings, otherwise to aunts and uncles. And if you have no blood relatives and just the spouse, then it goes to the imam's degree, which is clearly a word I made up. And it just means like the public welfare fund, the state, whatever you want to call it. Okay? Any questions so far before we jump into math? How much goes to spouse? Well, I'm glad you asked. The spousal degree, Surah Nisa. All right, so you all have Surah Nisa verse, what was it, 13, 14 of open? Go to verse 12. I want you all to start reading the verses. And let's do a little simulation. Well, the verses verbatim. And your wives shall have I'm just read the Arabic. And your wife, وَلَهُنَّ رُبُعُ مِمَّا تَرَكْتُمْ إِن لَمْ يَكُنْ لَكُمْ وَلَدٌ فَإِنْ كَانَ لَكُمْ وَلَدٌ فَلَهُنَّ الثُّمُنُ مِمَّا تَرَكْتُمْ. Okay, so God has basically put a multiple choice equation for you. If-then statements. Very simple. You don't need to refer to the law for this component. I want you all to read the Quran and apply it yourself. Now, the way we're going to apply it is you're going to circle A or B. All right, how many of you are in that category? You have a wife and you circled A. Raise your hand. What does that mean? It means you have, what's the differentiating factor? It's whether you have children or not. If you have a child and you have a wife, how much does your wife inherit? Well, if you don't have a child, your wife inherits 1/4. Otherwise, 1/8. How many of you prefer fractions over percentages? None of you. You hate fractions. How many of you prefer percentages? Most of you. How many of you hate math altogether? All right, your husband. Husband receives how much? Half, if you have no kids. Otherwise, 1/4, 25%. If you have questions as to why this is the case, consult your Maulana. The right answer is it never gets to this point because everything belongs to your wife anyways. Now, so if you all had paper and plates, you would write who inherits. And you could take out your phones and write notes, inshallah. So how much does your spouse inherit? You write that number down. Next. How much do your parents inherit? It's a simple formula. So instead of you going through all the different variations, you're going to do it yourself. If you have a child, there we go. Here's the distinction. If you have a child, how much does your mom inherit? You hate fractions. I need percentages. 1/6. 16.6%. There we go. How much does your father inherit? The same. All right, great. So far, so good. And we're going to increase in complexity. And this is the verse right before that, right? Surah Nisa, verse 10. How much does your mom inherit if you have no children? 1/3. There we go. But then there's a third option. If you have siblings, your mom inherits 1/6. How much do your siblings inherit? No, nothing. They still inherit nothing because they're category 2. Your siblings just became a problem. But there's obviously some wisdom behind this, and it's not too difficult to understand. But wait, where's the father section? How much does the father inherit if you have no child? The Quran doesn't mention it, does it? Question mark. We'll come back to that. Yeah? Very good question. So it says brothers, ikhwa. Now the application of that is brother plus 2 sisters, or 4 sisters, or 2 brothers. So the equivalent shares of 2 brothers, which is 4 sisters. So if that exists, short answer, your father gets more. And now it goes back down to the siblings later. That's not enough. It has to be brothers. Well, your brother still gets nothing, whether it's brother or brothers. Because there's second category. First is parents and children. That's it. If you don't have a child, but you have a parent, it doesn't go to siblings. Siblings do not inherit if any of these people are living. All right, so now you have the numbers, right? You can apply it to yourself. If you have a child, okay, well, I'm this one and I'm this one, for example. Simple. You write those numbers down, right? I can see you all mentally are inscribing it. MashaAllah. Take photographic memory, MashaAllah. But then this one is still a question mark. Now the third category, the most complicated category. No one more complex, or no one creates more complications than your... I'm not going to answer that. All right, so now we have 3 scenarios. Verses of the Quran, this is actually the first one that comes up. يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُمْ لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. All right, one at a time. What's the percentage for the kids? There is no percentage. There is no fraction. It's a ratio. Okay, so we'll skip that for now. If you have multiple daughters and only daughters, what's the number? I hear a lot of mumbling. How much? There we go, 66.6%. If you have multiple daughters, 2/3. And if you have one daughter, 50%. So now, put it all together. You have the Islamic inheritance rules ready for you that you can put in your will. Simple as that. You can use an online tool, but I wanted you to go through the Quranic verses and come to the conclusion. Where? Yes.
So again, just to recap, this is all from all of your wealth left over.
This is the leftover of your wealth, which is 2/3 if you've used the 1/3.
And your whole, the concept of waiver that you mentioned.
Yes.
So you know how, like, the son gets double the daughter if, let's say, after the passing, they decide, okay, we're going to split it equally, that's also fine.
That's exactly true. So the question that was asked is, if my kids, let's say I have a son and 2 daughters, my son says, I really don't care, let's make it all equal. That's your son giving up his right to that additional portion and giving it to the other daughters. Can he do that? Yes, absolutely. All right. Any questions about this? Is there anything that doesn't make sense to you? That's the only question I'm asking right now. Anything that, a question mark besides the ones you see on the screen? Can I change the law? تلك حدود الله. MashaAllah. All right. Now let's do the children one, the question mark. Actually, before then, if you fall into this category where you have no children, it's fairly straightforward. You're left with this one question mark. The short answer, and of course there's exceptions to almost every rule, is that your father gets the rest. Simple as that. Okay, so that's resolved. But if you do have children, so you're like, okay, 1/8 or 1/4, 1/6 and 1/6, and then now you have these question marks to resolve, let's do that together. And I want you all to have the answers for yourselves. So we're going to do a little activity. We'll do one simulation here, and you can share your own scenarios too, if it's not on the screen. You're going to put your children on the screen, like I have put here, 1 daughter, 1 son. How does a 2-to-1 ratio look like? You put 1 tally next to the daughter, 2 tallies next to the son, over 3, because that's 3 tallies. 1/3, 2/3. Everything else goes to the kids, and this is how it's distributed. Simple as that. While you are alive, and while you are not expecting death imminently, you may give everything to your wife. Yes, transferring. Transferring, which means that you lose control. She can kick you out if she wants to. But then she will have to do this, which might be worse. I get asked this question a lot in relation to kids. What if I just give everything to my 1 daughter and not my son while I'm living? That means that you are okay and when transferring during your lifetime the whole house to your daughter, and she now has the right to kick you out. If you are not okay with those consequences, then you are not transferring. And therefore, it's part of yours. We're going to conclude somewhat shortly, so please join me in going through some of these scenarios, and feel free to ask your own. So I put another scenario up there. Let's say you have 2 daughters, 2 sons. Now it's over 6. If you have 2 daughters and a son, now it's over 4. Instead of you just like looking up your scenario, I want you to kind of do it yourself. 2 sons and a daughter, 3 sons, a daughter and a son. Any questions here or any scenarios that people want to bring up? Good. Okay, there. Oh, I just made it to be consistent with this. 2/6 is the same as 1/3. All right, awesome, alhamdulillah. Okay, so another thing that's also mentioned in the Quran specifically are the siblings. The inheritance of siblings are specifically mentioned. Anyone know what that term is for someone who has no parents or kids? Yeah. You can look at the screen, you can cheat. Kalala. And so, yastaftunaka fi, and then that's in relation to kalala. This one specifically, fil kalala. There we go. Yastaftunaka fil kalala. The rules are there. I will not go over them. They're all in Surah Nisa. And if you want to put it all together, let's say you have, I'm just going to go quickly to the $2,000 again. You have $500 in debt. You don't use the 1/3 for whatever reason, and now you're left with $1,500. In this scenario where you have a mother, father, husband, 2 sons, and you have these shares, it goes mother and father and husband first, and the rest goes to the 2 sons. Make sense? Now you have actual numbers, alhamdulillah. And so I was going to play around with some of the scenarios that you guys may want to do. I will advise you, I'm going to share that if any of you actually tried to, some of you may have applied that scenario and realized a flaw. Did anyone put the numbers together and realize something? How many of you only have daughters and no sons? Did you do the math? The chances of it adding to 100% are not 100%. It probably didn't. What do you do there? That's where you have fiqh and scholarship discussing it. And instead of doing scenarios, inshallah, I'm just going to talk about a couple disqualifications. So these people are considered dead to you for inheritance purposes. We have one in relation to people born out of wedlock. Two, you cannot kill someone and expect to inherit from them, Islamically or legally. Anyone seen Knives Out? The movie, Knives Out? You understand what I'm talking about, right? The Slayer doctrine. Correction, you cannot inherit from someone you have killed and were caught. Conviction. If you were not convicted, things are different. And three, non-Muslims. To answer the question that was by the brother over there, non-Muslims do not inherit from you by default. Quick question. You have 4 children, one of them is non-Muslim. Before inheritance is given out, all of a sudden they run forward. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Rasulullah. Inherit or not? They inherit. You'd be surprised how many financial incentives we have for becoming Muslim. And you're like, oh, that wasn't a genuine Muslim or genuine Islam. It's not that, conversation for another time. And there's a few things that are like reserved for the eldest son: the ring, the sword, the armor, the Remington or Glock 19, the holy book of Quran. Actually, according to Ayatollah Sistani, there's ihtiyat wajib on firearms, meaning that you cannot just give the firearms to whoever. Those firearms belong to the eldest son. According to ihtiyat wajib, they have to do a sulh. That's what Sistani says. And then finally, I'm just going to provide our contact information on the screen if you would like to contact us for consultations, estate planning that's done. We have Sister Zainab Hamdan, who gave us the presentation on wills. She has a lot of experience with even the probate process or surrogate process, what happens for a will when you pass. Second, she's licensed in New York. I am not licensed in New York. So if you're a New Yorkan, or whatever you call yourselves, what? New Yorker. New York. What was it? Not a cowboy. What is it? Call yourself Yankee. If you're a Yankee, yeah. If you're not a Yankee, we don't like the Yankees. Go Mets. Then here's my contact information as well. Sister Zainab has cards as well to share. I do not, so this is your one and only opportunity to get my contact information. Of course, you can also look at the recording and find it later. All right, and that concludes our session on Islamic wills. There's a lot more to talk about, obviously. I gave a very consolidated version that I find applicable and relevant for this conversation. And inshallah, we will hand it off back to Sister Noreen, who has graciously hosted this event. Please recite aloud salawat.
Thank you, everyone. Can we have another loud salawat for all of our panelists, mashallah? Just wanted to thank all of our, mashallah, distinguished panelists who are are extremely educated on this topic. I know we took question and answers as we went along in this program. So if anybody has any specific questions and answers, the panelists are going to be hanging around for a little bit after this program, so you can go and speak to them. But of course, with the attorneys, they also have their business cards here. If it's going to be lengthy and lengthy questions, you can consult with them at a separate time. They can set up that time with you on when they can go over that. I also wanted to extend a gratitude for Dr. Iqbal Jafri, who really came up with the idea of doing this program at Masjid-e-Ali. It's extremely important for all of the members of the community. And Dr. Iqbal has just been a pleasure to work with in putting this program together. So thank you so much. And Maulana Rizwan, of course, thank you for all that you do and for your assistance in helping us put this program together. Brother Kazim Ali, I don't think I've ever met him in person. I'm not sure if he's here, but he also assisted a lot in the technology aspect and putting the flyers together. So everybody that assisted and helped, thank you so much. And again, a big thank you to our doctors, our attorneys, for this informative discussion, and they'll be available for a few minutes afterwards to ask your specific questions. Thank you. Salawat, please.